On the mountain road, a luxurious carriage was rolling along. Inside the carriage, a cheerful blonde girl started a conversation. "Hey, look at me," the girl continued. "You said you're 12, right? I'm also 12. So who's going to be the younger one?" The black-haired boy replied indifferently, "Whatever. If you want to be the older one, go ahead," which surprised the girl. "What?" He clicked his tongue, turning his face away with a bored expression. How annoying. After a moment of silence, he spoke again. "All right then, you be the younger one." The girl puffed out her cheeks in protest. "What? When did I say I wanted to be the younger one?" The boy looked out the window, his voice resolute. "The important thing is, from now on, we'll be family." He murmured the word to himself, his gaze distant. Family. His thoughts began to drift to the past. Currently, I'm about to become family with strangers, but I once had a family too. His name was Boris Ginneman, the second son of Jurkin Ginneman, Lord of Travach's Longord. Memories flashed back 12 years ago. At the Ginneman family mansion, young Boris was welcomed to the mansion, where a solemn funeral was taking place. In the coffin was a white-haired woman, her long hair covering her entire face. A maid carried infant Boris, sadly saying, "It's a pity that only I am by your side tonight." A man from the family introduced. "As you can see, our Ginneman family is a renowned martial arts clan." The maid looked fondly at Boris, speaking of his future as a brave warrior, inheriting the family's armor and sword. She revealed he would share those treasures, Winterer and Snowguard, with his older brother, young Master Yevgen. Her voice dropped as she mentioned the cold master who might despise his younger children after the lady's passing, but she still believed. "Young Master Yevgen is a kind boy. He will surely love you. Young Master Boris, please survive." This kingdom of Travachis witnesses countless deaths from revolution every day. The uncle, ostracized by the family, now always dreams of the day he will have his revenge. In these chaotic times, anyone can lose their life at any moment. But even if the family faces bloodshed, or if someone covets the family treasures, do not worry. One survivor among us will surely exact revenge, because the Ginneman family never forgets love, kindness, and the wrongs others have inflicted upon them. Therefore, young Master Boris, the one chosen to survive, must. A mysterious voice echoed. "Yes, you must survive, Boris. Survive to the very end in this suffering world." The young man with the destined purple hair listened silently. "The one I have chosen is not allowed to die." A memory suddenly rushed back on a night of pouring rain at the Ginneman family mansion. The stern old maid gripped young Boris's hand and warned, "There's a vengeful spirit lurking near Lake Emera. Remember my words, young Master Boris. No matter what happens, you must absolutely not go near that lake," she added with a haunted expression. At night, it can be seen from the mansion, especially on stormy nights like this. Its eyes glowed brightly in the darkness, waiting to devour those who dared to approach. The old warning echoed again. "That's why, young master, never go near Lake Emera." In the memory, Boris asked his brother, "Did the nurse tell you the same thing?" Yevgen replied, "Yes, but everyone tells me that." Yevgen continued the warning, saying that no matter what happened, he must absolutely not go near Lake Emera, and beware of the red-eyed ghost that lives there. Yevgen gently stroked his brother's cheek, reassuring him, "You don't need to worry about such things. Don't worry, little Boris." Yevgen Ginneman smiled brightly, promising, "I will always be here for you." Boris looked up at him, secretly thinking that his smile today was unusually radiant, giving him a strange feeling that something was off. Nevertheless, he happily replied, "Yes, big brother." Yevgen playfully ruffled his brother's hair. "Shoo, birds fly away. My brother's hair isn't a nest," making Boris yelp. "What birds?" Then, Yevgen pulled out a wooden sword. "Come on, it's time for practice as promised." Boris excitedly swung his sword. "Haha, take this." The boy stumbled, almost falling after missing his swing. Yevgen caught him, patted his head, and instructed, "You should make sure you're within striking range first. You swung from too far away." The two wooden swords clashed. Yevgen smiled and praised. "But your stance isn't bad." "Well done, Boris," Yevgen said with a laugh, easily parrying his brother's blow. Boris shouted with determination, "This time I'm really going to attack. Get ready, big brother." The boy rushed to hug Yevgen, making his big brother dramatically cry out. Both tumbled onto the lush green grass in a playful moment. Lying on the ground, Boris giggled and asked, "Why did you fall backward like that?" Yevgen laughed back, "Who pushed me first?" Meanwhile, from a luxurious room, Jurkin Ginneman and a long-haired man were observing. The long-haired man remarked, "It seems young Master Yevgen is very fond of his younger brother. Young Master Boris is also very attached to him." Jurkin merely clicked his tongue in disdain. He coldly uttered, "How pathetic for an heir of the family." The long-haired man added, "This is not the time to be loitering." Suddenly, Jurkin looked surprised, as if a pang of pain had struck him. Back at the training ground, Yevgen encouraged, "Let's try again, Boris. and his younger brother eagerly agreed. Yevgen instructed, "Try to hold your sword firmly," while Boris secretly thought about the strange feeling that still lingered. Yevgen intently watched his younger brother, his gaze turning serious. Boris parried the attack, and Yevgen immediately praised, "Well done," but Boris got too close, making Yevgen exclaim in surprise. "Boris, you're too close again." "Wait!" Yevgen frantically shouted. Boris froze, his eyes wide, as he realized he had lost control. Yevgen quickly embraced his younger brother, gently holding his chin and taking all the blame. "Boris, I'm sorry, I was wrong. I won't do it again," Boris whispered, still stunned. "This is my first time." Boris's thoughts echoed with extreme fear, as if someone was trying to take his life. While Yevgen was worried about his younger brother, a frantic call for the two of them rang out from afar. A strange man rushed over, stopping them with an urgent warning. "Don't return to the family mansion." He was out of breath, struggling to utter the ominous name. "Vlado Jineman, the elder has returned." The shocking news stunned both Jineman brothers. Boris thought to himself, his uneasy premonition had finally come true. He recognized that feeling, which, though uncontrollable, sometimes flared up into a deadly omen. At the same time, at the Jineman family mansion, a storm seemed to be brewing. A loyal dog growled at the stranger, whom it had forgotten. That person, Vlado Jineman, stood tall amidst the stormy weather, uttering a derogatory remark. "Fool." Inside, Lord Jurkin Jineman sat silently behind his desk, exuding an icy authority. His aide reported on the uninvited guest. "Should we let him in?" the aide cautiously asked. Jurkin replied with a single word, cold and decisive. "Yes." The heavy door creaked open. A figure strode confidently into the room. Vlado Jineman faced his brother after many years apart, silently vowing that the moment of revenge had arrived. "Brother Jurkin," Vlado greeted, his eyes full of provocation. Jurkin narrowed his eyes and retorted, "It's been 5 years since I banished you. Surprising, Vlado, that you're still alive." Vlado sneered. "What's wrong, brother? Are you disappointed to see me here?" The narration echoed ominously. "But have you come all this way just to die?" Vlado Jineman and his retinue entered the office, remarking, "Nothing has changed here. Everything just looks a little older." He smiled smugly, requesting, "Bring us some drinks. We've rushed for half a day to have a long talk with you." 2 silver cups were placed on the table. Vlado sat down in a chair, facing his brother, Jurkin Jineman. He leisurely took a sip of water, his sharp gaze never leaving Jurkin. Vlado began to bring up old memories. "Do you remember when we were children?" A memory flooded back. The 2 brothers from long ago sparring with wooden swords on the Longord fields. In the flashback, Vlado recounted the days they skipped practice, running and playing together on the hills. But the joy was short-lived. Jurkin was scolded by his father for not fulfilling his duties as the eldest son. The young Jurkin of that day could only silently turn his back and walk away. Returning to the present, Jurkin impatiently asked directly, "What do you want?" Vlado smirked. "You're too impatient." He slammed the cup onto the table, declaring, "All right, let's get straight to the point as you wish." Vlado revealed, "As you know, Elector Khan, who stands behind me, will become the Grand Elector in this election." He warned that then, Jurkin's faction would become a thorn in the side of the victorious faction. Vlado declared his reason for returning was to protect the family, but Jurkin dismissed him. "If you're going to talk nonsense, get out of this mansion." Vlado scoffed defiantly. "Ha! This mansion doesn't just belong to you, does it?" he emphasized. "Our parents passed it down to us," making Jurkin grit his teeth in anger. Jurkin growled back, while Vlado feigned innocence. "Have you forgotten that you yourself abandoned it?" Jurkin roared. "Our sister died unjustly because of you. Have you forgotten Yanichka?" Vlado sneered in response. "Haha. Think carefully, brother." He feigned innocence, pointing to himself. "How is that my fault?" Jurkin grew even more furious. "If it weren't for your dirty scheme." In his memory, Yanichka's radiant image appeared. She would have survived with her fiancé. Vlado coldly turned the tables. "Back then, the one who did that to Yenny, the one who went mad and killed her," he growled, pointing directly at the cruel truth. "It wasn't me. It was you." Jurkin's hand trembled with rage, clutching the cup tightly. "You dare." His fury erupted as he smashed the cup. "Utter such a ridiculous excuse in front of me." Vlado calmly wiped his face, uttering sarcastically, "After all these years, you're still as pathetic as ever." He continued to mock the stubbornness of the family of Travaches, a family already torn apart. Images of Jurkin's 2 sons appeared as Vlado posed a rhetorical question. "Do you think your sons will be different from us?" Jurkin could not bear it any longer, coldly ordering, "Get out." Vlado placed his hand on the table, slowly delivering his final warning. "Brother, you'd better remember this." He stood up, looking down at his brother with an arrogant air. "This is your last chance." Vlado made a false offer. "Since we are brothers, I've come to forgive all your mistakes, and Elector Khan will also turn a blind eye." His sinister smile finally revealed his true purpose. Just hand over the Winterbottom set. Without another word, Jurkin drew his sword and pointed it directly at Vlado. Get out, he roared his definitive refusal. Immediately. Even if my head shatters, I will not give you anything. Facing the sharp blade, Vlado merely bared his teeth in a wicked grin. Vlado Gynaman sneered. You are indeed as foolish as I thought. He turned his back and walked away, issuing a challenge. Fine. Let's see how long you can last. His final threat echoed. I will take everything from you. Jurkin Gynaman coldly called his loyal butler's name. Tulk. Begin preparations, he ordered decisively. Standing by the window, Jurkin resolved. It's time to resist. The scene shifted to a stormy night, portending ill omens. Inside the mansion, a tense atmosphere prevailed. Yevgen Gynaman carried Boris, rushing down the corridor, asking the escort, Where is father? Butler Tulk has gone down to the training grounds, the man replied as Yevgen pressed him. The escort opened a door, urging hastily. Hurry, young master. As the heavy door opened, Yevgen whispered. It's time, he stated resolutely to Boris. To use the Winterbottom set, Boris looked up at his brother. His eyes filled with astonishment and confusion. A legend was recounted. The Winterbottom set, armor acquired after slaying a lord and 99 enemies. It was the protective armor named the Snow Guard, and the sword, the Winterer, forged through 30 years of warfare. The heirloom of the Gynaman family, equipment only for the strongest warrior, it had become an ancient rumor over the centuries. But now, Yevgen was reaching for that forgotten treasure. He solemnly handed the sword to Boris, its new master. The story flashed back to the beginning of the year at the Gynaman mansion, when Yevgen's father called him. Yevgen, I have something I want to show you. Follow me. The solemn father led the way by candlelight, telling his eldest son who followed, You must have heard about it. Meanwhile, little Boris secretly hid behind the door, listening to his father talk about the family treasure. Before them was a suit of armor, and a sword radiating magical light, called the Winterbottom set. Yevgen exclaimed in astonishment that it truly existed, and his father confirmed that keeping it a secret had been successful. The father revealed that his grandfather had divided the treasure between him and Vlado, but it was a mistake. He explained to a worried Yevgen that the treasure set only unleashed its full power when combined. Then he solemnly declared, You will turn 20 this year. You must learn your role as the heir. His gaze grew heavy as he posed a grim hypothetical. If the family faces danger, you must take the Winterbottom set and flee, an order that stunned Yevgen, making him wonder, flee alone? The father growled, entrusting him with the final mission. No matter what happens, survive and protect the family heirloom, he affirmed to a stunned Yevgen. The family will endure through you. The father's final instruction echoed. You must not lose it. Do you understand, Yevgen? Standing in the shadows, Boris could only hear his brother's solemn reply. Yes, father. Returning to the present, Yevgen reintroduced the treasure to Boris. This is the Winterbottom set. Boris cheered excitedly, while Yevgen smiled and asked which item he preferred. Boris, reflecting on their old conversation, replied that the sword looked cooler. Hearing this, Yevgen decided immediately. Then you shall take the Winterer. He solemnly handed the sword to a stunned Boris, encouraging him to try holding it. But the sword was too heavy. Its tip struck the floor with a loud clang. In an old memory, Boris thought to himself, It seems even this sword is too heavy for me. Yevgen gently encouraged. You can do it, watch. He smiled and affirmed. Winterer is your sword, Boris. Since then, his brother's words always echoed in Boris's mind, making him gradually believe that Winterer was truly his sword. But back in the present, he told himself, However, compared to my brother, I'm just a child. Boris believed. This sword should have belonged to him. There's no way it's mine. Suddenly, Yevgen grabbed his collar, urgently announcing, Uncle has started a rebellion. Father must have foreseen this. We must follow the plan. He placed a hand on his brother's shoulder, reassuring him, Don't worry too much, Boris. But the two words rebellion had deeply embedded themselves in the boy's mind. Boris suddenly recalled, Butler Tulk once told me about rebellion. Tulk's voice echoed in his memory. A rebellion within a family only has winners and losers, no right or wrong. He explained to young Boris back then. It means, no matter how many people die, no one will be punished, no one will acknowledge or mourn them. Tulk looked directly at the young master. Young Master Boris, because you are also a member of Travach's. When the time is right, you will understand. Back in reality, Tulk's words haunted Boris. No one will acknowledge or mourn. Yevgen took the sword, saying, Boris, I'll borrow the sword for a moment. But then he paused, turning his head to call his brother, who was lost in thought. Boris? Yevgen's voice rang out decisively. You don't need to give it back to me. It's your sword, little brother. Boris looked up, tears welling in his eyes. Father gave it to you, not me. You're the one who deserves it. I just hope you'll mourn for me. Yevgen silently looked at his brother, not saying a word. Yevgen Jinaman gently placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. Boris, the Winterer sword is yours, he asserted. I won't borrow it without permission, and I'll return it as soon as this rebellion ends. Boris hesitated in response. But I can't even hold it properly. Yevgen smiled reassuringly. Don't you remember the last time we held swords together? It might be a bit heavy now, but don't worry too much. He continued to affirm, you'll manage. You'll be able to use it, because you are a warrior. Just like the meaning of your name, Boris. Suddenly, loud shouts from outside echoed in, startling Boris. Both brothers looked towards the window, where the glow of battle fires was cast upon the night sky. Yevgen hugged his brother tightly, his eyes hardening. It has begun. Meanwhile, outside, a voice rang out amidst the sea of torch-wielding people. Today, the head of the Jaiman family will change, the leader shouted. Lay down your weapons and surrender. Serve the new master and help restore the Jinaman family. From above, Jurkin Jaiman looked down disdainfully, thinking to himself, those easily swayed by such words have long since disappeared. He looked at the sea of fire from the rebels. Though it cannot compare to my father's golden age, I still have Jinaman soldiers who have sworn loyalty. Jurkin stepped onto the balcony, boldly declaring war. Those who dare to invade Longord, face the light. The rebels exclaimed in surprise. It's Jurkin Jaiman, he's on the rooftop. Facing him, Vlado Jinaman smirked, his hand beginning to channel magic. Are you going to hide and cower? Then I shall light up this entire area, he roared, unleashing his magic. Rise, white flame. A massive white-blue magical energy surge swept across the battlefield. Jurkin's soldiers screamed in panic. What is this? Fire magic? A bearded soldier roared, rallying his comrades. Kill the filthy traitor, Vlado. But the soldiers panicked and fled. They have a mage. Run. Jurkin Jinaman roared at the cowardice of his soldiers. Advance, you bastards. Do you think the Jinaman family will fall before a rabble? But a sudden surge of power struck him, making him stumble. Another commander was utterly terrified. What the hell is that? In the sky, a giant magic circle appeared, summoning a colossal ice serpent. The summoner cried out. Summoned from the ice realm, Krigl. Jurkin gritted his teeth. You dare use such dirty tricks. He thought to himself that only about 3 people in Traviches could summon Krigl. And then he recognized the leader of the enemy army. Jongnal, the archmage of Elector Khan, is here too? Vlado Jinaman's smug smile confirmed everything, making Jurkin unable to believe how firmly established his younger brother's position had become. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, chaos reigned as everyone was ordered to evacuate urgently. A sky-shattering explosion, the main tower of the mansion was collapsing. The father led the evacuation, his mind outlining the plan. Evacuating from the mansion is the top priority. He turned back to call Boris but suddenly froze when he saw an unwelcome sight. Yevgen was holding Boris's hand tightly, both standing amidst the ruined corridor. The father pulled Boris away and yelled, Leave him, I'll take Boris. But Yevgen protested. But father, he held the panicked Boris tightly, questioning his eldest son. How do you plan to escape from here with a child? Yevgen stood silently, his gaze firm as he heard his father roar, Don't you realize what you're protecting right now? With a resolute expression, Yevgen only said one word. Go, hurry. The father had no choice but to embrace Boris and run in one direction, while Yevgen turned his back, rushing alone towards danger. An escort hurriedly led the way. Master, young Master Boris, this way. Pulled along by his father, Boris gasped, thinking, Father said we couldn't escape with a child, didn't he? He recalled his father's stern face and bitterly realized. In the end, I'm just a burden to my brother. Memories of his father's words to Yevgen flooded back. Yevgen must live and protect the treasure, because even if I survive, I cannot protect the family. Boris was confused, a premonition telling him something was wrong. But a strange feeling welled up in his heart again. He had a feeling. The image of Yevgen's sword flashed in his mind, that something bad was about to happen to Yevgen, who was rushing alone into the ruined corridor. At the same time, at the mansion, a giant ice serpent appeared, causing the people to scream in terror. On the ground, a loyal army roared. Attack! Having reached safety, Jurkin Jinaman looked back. It seems most people have escaped. But the mansion? Boris turned back with a stunned expression. Before his eyes, the family mansion exploded into pieces. Boris was frozen in horror, while his father gritted his teeth in fury. Jurkin roared in rage. Vlado, that bastard, I will never forgive him. He turned and ordered. Tulk, check the status of Squad 1 and Squad 2. Tulk immediately cast a scouting spell. The battlefield appeared, Vlado's forces completely overwhelming, and he ordered a full assault. Through the magic screen, Jurkin remained unfazed, immediately devising a new counterattack plan. Boris anxiously asked about the monster, but Jurkin dismissed him. It'll be fine. Stop whining. That monster cannot touch living beings in this world, because half of its body is in another world. Boris was startled to hear information about the monster's nature. Tolk concentrated, using scouting magic through the night. Under the moonlight, Jurken's entire army crossed the field to retreat from the mansion. Jurken ordered his son, Boris, fall back. When the battle begins, just run straight into the field. You must run, understand? The boy asked in confusion. Run where? Jurken was silent for a moment, his face full of determination. Then he spoke the fateful name, Lake Amera, where a pair of glowing red eyes lurked in the darkness. Boris froze, his eyes wide with horror when he heard that name. He stammered. But the nanny said there's an evil spirit there, and Jurken grabbed him, snapping. You believe in old servants' words? How dare you claim to be a Chinaman? He explained. It's precisely because of that foolish rumor that no one dares to go near it. That place will be safer than anywhere else. There will be 3 black-trunked trees near the lake. Hide there, and your father will come for you after the battle. To his father's question, understand, Boris could only tremble in reply. Aye. Just then, Tulk spoke up. Master, it's time. Jurken immediately turned, roaring the command. Everyone, attack the east gate. His soldiers charged forward in unison, their morale high. Seeing his son still hesitating, Jurken turned back and yelled, What are you waiting for? Get up and run now. Boris stood rooted to the spot, stunned by his father's fury. The boy gritted his teeth, closed his eyes tightly, and gathered all his courage. He thought to himself, Father is right, she must have made it up. I have to run. To Lake Amera. Then he plunged headfirst into the deep forest. In the middle of the night, the battlefield became chaotic, with screams and clashing weapons as the ice serpent Krigl swept through the soldiers. Vladujinaman smirked, shouting, Now, appear. He stood before the enemy, arrogantly asking, Shall I strike you all down? Vlado's blade gleamed with dark light, ready for the slaughter. In a flash, he plunged into merciless slaughter, blood dyeing the entire area red. Vlado stepped on a soldier's corpse, his voice provocative. Brother, where are you hiding? You treated me like a criminal, drove me away, then seized the family and its assets for yourself. He continued to mock. And now, you're hiding like a scared little mouse. Suddenly, a soldier spotted the target and yelled, There he is! It's Jurken Jonaman. Vlado turned, his cold gaze fixed on his brother. He muttered to himself, Not much longer. The day the Dark Blade's black sword will be replaced by the Silver's winter sword. Surrounded by rebel forces, Jurken Jaiman stood tall in his silver armor. Gasping for breath from exhaustion, Jurken growled, How audacious, to dare trespass on my territory, he roared, swinging his sword and striking down a soldier. Facing enemies as numerous as ants, Jurken still defiantly challenged. Bring it on, he roared in fury. I will make you pay for this foolish bravery. Just then, Vlado suddenly appeared from behind, stabbing a fatal blow into his brother. He whispered into the stunned Jurken's ear, Brother Jurken. Vlado coldly pulled out the blood-soaked sword, leaving his dying brother. Jurken staggered, clutching his wound, exclaiming in horror, You! An ambush! Vlado turned and walked away, uttering a sarcastic remark. Humph, you're not what you used to be. Vlado sneered, scoffing. Obviously, because you've grown old. He cruelly twisted the sword deeper into his brother's back. Jurken Jaiman coughed up blood, his face contorted in extreme pain. Suddenly, a loyal mage rushed over, shouting, Master! Vlado growled in response. I'll kill you along with him. A flash of magic light erupted, blocking Vlado's attack. He was astonished as a thick fog suddenly enveloped everything. Vlado's soldiers panicked. What kind of fog is this? I can't see anything. Amidst the chaos, the loyal mage managed to cast a spell, a glowing magic circle appearing in his hand. He supported the heavily wounded Jurken, preparing for a narrow escape. Vlado roared in fury. Are you trying to run away like a coward? Both were enveloped in teleportation light, as Vlado roared helplessly. How pathetic! Jurken Jaiman! Vlado's hateful shout echoed through the forest as the magic dissipated. He gnashed his teeth, his rage evident in every feature. Find him immediately, Vlado ordered, with only Jurken's pool of blood remaining on the ground. At the same time, in a dark forest, Boris Jaiman was running for his life. The boy mumbled the rendezvous point as he ran. Blackwood Base. Blackwood Base. Finally, he found his destination and sighed in relief. There it is. Hiding behind an ancient tree, Boris reassured himself. Father will be here soon. He said so. The exhausted boy sat down, determined to wait. So, until then, Boris leaned against the tree trunk, exhausted but still trying to wait. The boy sat alone in the silent, desolate forest. Suddenly, a strange sound echoed, startling him. What was that sound? His hand instinctively gripped his arm, trying to calm his fear. He nervously hoped, Is Father here? Or is it? Boris held his breath, straining his ears to listen in the dense darkness. He realized with horror. The sound suddenly stopped. With eyes wide in fear, he timidly peeked out from behind the tree trunk. Immediately, crimson ribbons seized Boris, dragging him away amidst his desperate screams. Lifted into the air, he recognized the attacker with horror. Is that the lake spirit? Struggling desperately, he recalled the warning. The nanny was right. Could father really not know that there's a monster in the lake? The ribbons tightened, and he choked out a thought. Why are you doing this? Facing death, Boris screamed. No, I don't want to die. Father, Yevgen. Just then, a mysterious figure rushed in with terrifying speed, slicing the monster apart. Freed from the grip, Boris fell sprawling to the ground. A splash of monster blood flew towards him, but was blocked, leaving a strange mark on his face. Boris gasped, looking up at his savior in astonishment. The strange man silently approached the utterly terrified boy. Under the full moon, the silhouette of the mysterious swordsman loomed over Boris. Boris, why are you here? Yevgen Janiman cried out in horror upon finding his brother. Boris looked bewildered, recognizing the newcomer. Huh? Without waiting for Boris to react, Yevgen rushed forward and embraced him. Boris was stunned in his brother's arms, his eyes wide with surprise. You almost died, Yevgen whispered, his voice trembling with fear. Boris burst into sobs. Father told me to wait here. Yevgen was stunned. Father left you here alone. Why are you here? The boy whimpered, explaining. Father said, you have to protect the Winterbottom gear. Yevgen fell silent at his father's cruel command. Boris wiped away his tears, asserting, I don't agree with father. I think family is more important than treasure. The boy continued to argue sharply. If we all die, what good is the treasure? Boris looked up and asked his brother. How did you know I was here? Yevgen smiled gently. I'm your brother. No matter where you are, I have to protect you. Yevgen. Boris called his brother's name emotionally, just as a blue light flashed. The boy's eyes widened, reflecting the sudden dazzling light. What was that light just now? Yevgen asked confusedly, while Boris merely looked embarrassed. Yevgen's expression suddenly turned serious, and he gripped his brother's shoulders. Listen carefully, Boris. He revealed a shocking secret. Uncle isn't the only enemy. Elector Khan is cooperating with him, Yevgen explained. He's the one who lent Uncle all his soldiers and mages. What Elector Khan wants are Snowguard and Winterer. Yevgen explained that to gain the loyalty of the Jinnaman family, their father had to be eliminated. He continued. Father already knew everything. That's why he let us escape. Suddenly, a teleportation gate opened, and Boris screamed in horror. Father! As he saw Jurkin Jeinman, gravely wounded, being helped out by a mage. Yevgen frantically asked what had happened, and the mage replied. It was Hargroon. He explained that the Hargroon bestowed by Elector Khan contained an extremely potent toxin that resisted all healing magic, rendering his magic useless. Jurkin Jeinman struggled to ask his loyal attendant, but why didn't you? The mage turned to Yevgen, asking why he hadn't left earlier, which confused the young man. Yevgen brushed it off. No, it's fine. Are you two all right? A light just flashed from that direction and then disappeared. Hearing this, the mage frowned, realizing, I think it was near the mansion. He worried that one of the eyes of Quira had been activated, a scrying spell. With that spell, Archmage Jongnal could find anything, and Yevgen seeing the flash of light means your location has been exposed, the mage concluded, leaving Yevgen stunned, wondering what to do now. The mage could only say in despair, we'll just have to pray for our luck. At that moment, Jurkin Jeinman whispered an order, go. Yevgen called out to his father in shock, while Jurkin gripped the mage's hand tightly. Understanding his master's intent, the mage urged, go, young master Yevgen, then began to open another teleportation gate. Boris looked at his brother worriedly, while Yevgen clenched his fist, his eyes filled with determination. Yevgen gripped the crystal dagger, understanding his father's will to protect the family and its treasures. As the two brothers turned to leave, in another forest, Vlado Jinaman and his cavalry unit were galloping, in fierce pursuit. Vlado Jinaman roared in disbelief. Those brats don't know what fear is. Have they reached Lake Amera? It was an ancient fear of the people of Longord, a forbidden place, a terrible place, where tragedy had struck in the past, the place that had taken their only sister. Memories flooded back with a playful voice. Guess who Tilda? Yanichka giggled, immediately recognizing her second brother. All three siblings played together in the meadows during their carefree days. In Vlado's mind, she was the only one he truly cared about in the Jaiman family. The two brothers affectionately watched their little sister sleeping soundly, but Yanichka was also the only one who had to stand between her two constantly feuding brothers. She was always the one trying to reconcile them. Are you two going to keep acting like this forever? Her words still echoed. The memory shifted to a heated argument. Vlado yelling, You nightmare! Jurkin, are you insane? How could you marry Yenny off to a family like that? Vlado questioned. but Jurkin replied that it was her own decision. Jurkin said wearily, "There's nothing we can do now, Vlado, except wish her well." "Wish her well? Don't make me laugh." Vlado gritted his teeth. "Then, there's only one way." He sought out Yanichka and said, "Yenny, I think your fiancé is coming to Lake Emera." Hearing the name of that forbidden place, Yanichka froze, her face paling in horror. "He can't go there," she screamed, and both rushed off in a panic. In the past, Vlado Jinimon believed his plan had succeeded. He ordered his sister, "Go to the lake, Yenny." Vlado thought to himself, it would be better to have his subordinates kidnap her there, as he couldn't let her go yet. But the plan fell apart. Yanichka's piercing scream echoed along with a desperate plea. "Master!" Another scream rang out, signaling the worst. "The young lady has." The horrifying news spread. Young Lady Yanichka has been possessed by the lake's evil spirit. Vlado was stunned, unable to believe it. "Yenny. Why? She should have been captured by my subordinates on the way and couldn't even get near that lake." Just then, Jurkin pushed Vlado aside, growling, "Get out of the way, Vlado." Vlado frantically rushed towards his sister, yelling, "Yenny, we need to call a healer." But Jurkin coldly blocked him. "She no longer belongs to this world." Jurkin turned, his eyes burning with hatred. "Even if you disagreed with her engagement, you did something you should never have done." Vlado stammered in fear. I didn't know this would happen." He desperately rationalized in his mind. "I never thought that timid girl would go to the lake. How was I supposed to know the lake's evil spirit was real?" Jurkin ignored him. "Your excuses mean nothing to me, because you are no longer a Jinman." Jurkin ordered everyone to retreat to the mansion, while Vlado was held back, screaming, "What are you going to do?" As Jurkin drew his sword, Vlado frantically pleaded, "Jurkin, are you going to?" "No, I can fix this." Jurkin raised his glowing sword, his voice devoid of emotion. "The madness caused by an evil spirit can only be cured by death, Vlado." Jurkin advanced towards Yanichka, while Vlado was held tightly, screaming in despair. "Wait! Jurkin, damn it, let go!" In a memory, Vlado Janiman screamed in utter despair. His cry of "Yenny" echoed amidst the bloody scene. Back in the present, Vlado, now a ruthless man, commanded, "Search Lake Emera." He roared, demanding the soldiers search thoroughly. Suddenly, a horrifying shriek echoed from the darkness, startling the soldiers. From beneath the ground, a hideous creature slowly emerged. A zombie monster with a gaping maw lunged from a pile of corpses, roaring savagely. The soldiers fled in panic, despite Vlado angrily scolding them as cowards. Vlado swung his sword, cleaving a monster, cursing the corpses that kept rising. Facing an entire army of zombies, he recognized the disgusting stench of Lake Emera. He admitted the fear creeping in, but his eyes remained full of determination. Vlado thought to himself, if only he could defeat Jurkin, he would be willing to destroy all these abominable evil spirits. At the same time, the old mage escorting Yevgen and his family urged, "Let's go, young Master Yevgen." He reminded him of his father's dying wish to protect the family and the relic. Tulk, who was scouting, warned, "Damn it, they're close. We'll be discovered soon." But Yevgen firmly refused. "I won't go. I'll stay and protect father and my brother." Tulk delivered the grim news that Vlado Janiman was coming, and they were about to face their worst moment. Yevgen clutched the family heirloom, questioning that it was meant for times like these. He looked directly at his father and declared, "If you have what you want, then I also have what I want," Yevgen finished, leaving Jurkin speechless at his son's defiance. Yevgen turned to his brother, asking seriously, "Boris, you understand, right?" Boris was flustered, only able to stammer, "I." A memory suddenly rushed back, of young Boris secretly peeking into a dark room. From behind the door, he heard a bitter whisper that someone also hated Yevgen. Back in reality, Yevgen looked into the distance. "I don't intend to live alone. Boris, let's consider it a glorious death together." Boris was completely stunned by his brother's tragic declaration. Yevgen drew the glowing family heirloom sword, asserting, "I'll go first." Elsewhere, Tulk was helping the injured Jurkin and instructed, "Until you see me dead, please don't go outside." Boris anxiously watched his brother's back, his heart filled with unease. Yevgen stated firmly, "When it's my turn to face him, I won't back down." Hearing that, Boris suddenly awoke, as if he had understood everything. He recalled his brother's unusually blue eyes in the past, and his brother's unusually radiant smile when he was a child. Boris realized that those memories always held a strange premonition. As the group finally reached the lakeside, Tulk sighed in relief as he helped the staggering Jurkin. "Yes, we finally arrived." Jurkin gasped, looking at the dark lake and thinking, "She must be in here somewhere, right?" The image of Yanichka being submerged by evil spirits among the bones at the bottom of the lake appeared in his mind. Jurkin painfully called his sister's name amidst the silent night. "Yenny." Suddenly, a cold voice echoed from the darkness. Only now do you seek Yeni? Jurkin turned, astonished to see Vlado Jinaman appear, accusing in a harsh voice. After abandoning her without a grave, Vlado sneered, suggesting Yanichka would surely be happy to see the elder brother who stabbed her in the heart finally arrive. He growled, questioning Jurkin whether he would ever admit his sins, or merely come here to beg for forgiveness. To do that, Jurkin roared in despair. It's too late for both of us. Vlado smirked, deciding to settle this age-old feud until the red-eyed evil spirit appeared. Jurkin furiously swung his sword in response. Vlado, you bastard, I saved your life. Don't you realize your sins yet? Vlado retorted, claiming that Jurkin's own bitter words had turned Yeni into an unjustly deceased body, while simultaneously summoning spirits from the ground. Jungnal also joined the battle, attacking with fire magic and shouting, comparing them to writhing lake monsters. Are you still blaming me for that, brother? Vlado roared in fury. Jurkin gritted his teeth, parrying the blow, his gaze firm and unyielding. Vlado screamed his bitter truth. The one who took Yeni's life wasn't me, it was you. The sorrowful image of Yanichka flashed in their minds. Jurkin gritted his teeth, determined to end everything right here. Two swords clashed, sparking fire, as the life or death battle between the two brothers reached its climax. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Yevgen alone faced an army of zombies in the dark forest. He held Boris tightly, silently vowing to himself to protect his brother from the red-eyed evil spirit with the swords Snowguard and Winterer. Boris looked up, bewildered, asking, "A ghost? Wasn't what you destroyed in the forest an evil spirit?" Yevgen remained silent, his face revealing unspoken pain and burden. The young man struggled to grip the massive, trembling sacred sword in his hand. Boris looked at his brother, a memory suddenly rushing back. Brother. Father was right. His father's voice echoed in the flashback, instructing his son that the Winterbottom set was strongest when used by one person, and he must live to protect it. Yevgen was stunned to realize his father's words were true. Meanwhile, Boris resolved to block every attack to protect his brother at all costs. Yevgen had no other choice, pouring all his strength into the sacred sword. Boris was terrified as he felt the terrifying surge of energy. "Brother, the Snowguard is!" Boris screamed as Yevgen strained amidst a blue light. Yevgen gritted his teeth, sensing the enemy approaching. "It's here!" An earth-shattering explosion engulfed everything. Boris woke up bewildered in an endless white void. "What happened?" "Brother," he frantically called out in vain. Before him was a fiery red abyss. Boris desperately called Yevgen's name. The boy sank into a terrifying nightmare filled with eerie whispers. A pair of gruesome red eyes stared from the darkness, a voice echoing, "Such a beautiful child." Boris let out a scream of utter horror. He jolted, springing up as if he had just escaped hell. Before Boris now was a lush green meadow, he wondered in shock. Where is this? Suddenly, a familiar voice echoed from afar. "Boris!" Yevgen approached with a radiant smile, asking, "Are you awake?" He offered him a bowl of cool water, but Boris still couldn't believe his eyes. Yevgen gently asked, "What's wrong, Boris? Did you have a nightmare or something?" Without a word, Boris rushed to hug his brother, overwhelmed with happiness. Boris buried his face in his brother's chest, sobbing, "Brother." The boy lost his balance, tumbling forward. Yevgen replied with a gentle smile. Yevgen firmly stated, "I am your brother," while Boris secretly realized something was wrong. A flood of chaotic memories rushed into Boris's mind. "I was clearly at Lake Emera. Father was fighting Uncle Vlado, and my brother and I were facing an army of zombies." Back in reality, Boris confusedly asked what happened next, but Yevgen evaded. "Oh, it seems I need to get some more water." Boris bewilderedly called after him. "Brother, where is this?" Yevgen replied, "North of Longord, had a plateau, in the territory of the Gurum family." Yevgen explained they had ridden here while Boris was fast asleep, but the boy frantically asked, "What about father? Where is father?" Yevgen hesitated for a moment before replying, "Father has gone to another place." He further explained that the chaotic situation caused everyone to get separated. Boris worried. "So how do we find father now?" Yevgen patted his brother's head and reassured him that Butler Tulk would soon contact them with magic, making Boris wonder. "So, what do we do now?" Yevgen mused. "Let's see. Should we go see our aunt? Her faction doesn't have a bad relationship with father. Or we could head towards Elector Katsuya, whom father serves." Boris timidly suggested, "Can we not go anywhere? Instead of begging strangers, let's just live like commoners." Yevgen gave a wry smile. "I don't know how to live like that. Besides, the situation isn't good this year. The common folk won't be sympathetic to nobles." Boris fell silent. Yevgen continued, "Since father will contact us soon, until then, let's live quietly." Yevgen hadn't finished speaking when a rumbling stomach broke the serious atmosphere. Yevgen cheerfully suggested, "How about we stop by a nearby village and fill our stomachs first?" The two entered a noisy inn, where guests were laughing and chatting boisterously. The innkeeper warmly welcomed them, while the man beside her eyed them suspiciously. Yevgen boldly requested a room, while Boris cautiously hid behind him. The innkeeper merely smirked meaningfully. "The price is 10 elso," she coldly announced, making Yevgen flinch slightly. But when Yevgen produced a gold coin, her attitude immediately changed, and she exclaimed, "Well, I thought you looked like a rich young master." The guests in the inn began to whisper and mock the two noble boys who had strayed into a commoner's place. After handing over the key, the innkeeper asked what they wanted to eat. Yevgen tiredly replied, "Just serve whatever you have." "Anything?" she sneered, making Boris startle. Sensing something ominous, Yevgen quickly placed a hand on his brother's shoulder, reassuring him, "Boris, let's go." Immediately, the entire inn erupted with crude insults aimed at the two brothers. The innkeeper and her man exchanged a sinister glance. "Sorry for the wait," the man said, slamming a bowl onto the table. He and the other guests laughed maliciously, urging, "Young masters, let us know how it is." Boris was utterly horrified as he looked into the bowl, quickly covering his mouth. Inside was a bowl of soup teeming with wriggling maggots. The boy let out a piercing scream and fell backward off his chair. Those around burst into delighted laughter. "What's wrong? Hurry and eat, it's the inn's specialty." A guest in the inn stood up with a sneer. "Perhaps he doesn't know how to eat this dish. Shall I show you the proper way?" The man casually placed a hand on Yevgen's shoulder, but he calmly replied, "Huh? Just show me." Yevgen suddenly grabbed the man's wrist tightly. "All right, show me." With a sharp gaze, Yevgen declared, "I want you to eat it right in front of me." The man and those around him burst into delighted laughter. "Oh my, did everyone hear that? He wants me to try a bite first." He continued to mock, "What should I do? I don't think I'm hungry enough to eat someone else's food." Before he could finish speaking, Yevgen grabbed his collar and slammed his face onto the table, making him let out a piercing scream. Boris was stunned, the man's sarcastic words echoing in his head. "Since it's a specialty, don't hesitate." Holding the man's head down tightly, Yevgen said in an icy voice, "I invite you to sit at my table." The man struggled desperately, screaming, "Let me go! Get your hands off me!" His horror reached its peak when Yevgen brought a spoonful of wriggling bugs to his mouth. "Wait, are you really going to make me eat it?" Boris was utterly terrified, stammered an apology, then desperately called out, "Big brother." The boy screamed his brother's name in a panic. "Yevgen!" Hearing his brother's call, Yevgen paused for a moment. He quietly lowered his head, his expression hardening. Then Yevgen tightened his grip on the man's collar and growled, "Be grateful. I am not a person with a heart of stone." To the point of forcing others to eat a spoonful of bugs, Yevgen said decisively, then let the spoon clatter onto the table. He released the man, who was clutching his throat and coughing violently, then turned to his brother. "We'll eat later. Let's go, Boris." "You bastard! Where do you think you're going?" a patron roared, blocking the brother's path. Yevgen coldly turned back, his eyes showing no fear. He swiftly delivered a kick, knocking down one of the men blocking their way. The man fell flat on his back and furiously yelled, "You insolent brat! I'll teach you a lesson." Yevgen stood firm amidst the crowd, a sharp, claw-shaped magical item appearing in his hand. He thought to himself, "Should I draw Winterer? No. If I do that, everything here will truly have to end." If that's the case, Yevgen decided to grab a nearby wooden chair. He swung the chair directly at the head of an approaching man, stunning him. Another man screamed in horror, "That idiot! Get him!" The entire crowd furiously rushed at Yevgen. In the midst of the brawl, Yevgen took a full punch to the face but still didn't back down. Suddenly, he screamed in horror when he saw his brother in danger. "No! Let go!" interspersed with Boris's cry for help. "Big brother! Boris!" Yevgen roared when he saw his brother being grabbed by the hair by a man, his face pale with fear. The ringleader smirked and ordered, "Grab him too." Overwhelmed by numbers, both brothers were quickly subdued, and Yevgen was forced to his knees on the floor. Even though he was captured, Yevgen still gritted his teeth and growled, "Cowards!" A man with a repulsive smile approached Boris with a bowl of food and sneered, "Looks like you haven't been taught table manners, have you?" He called out, "Hey kid," making Boris startle and look up. The man bent down and gave an evil smile. "Why don't we take this opportunity to teach you some etiquette?" "I will teach you myself," the cruel man said while forcefully holding Boris's mouth shut, forcing him to eat a bowl full of bugs. "Stop!" Yevgen roared while being held tightly. "What do you think you're doing to that child?" The man smirked, holding Boris tightly and provoking. "Quite close with your brother, aren't you? So, do you want to eat it instead of him?" Without a moment's hesitation, Yevgen growled back, "All right, bring it here." The ringleader burst into delighted laughter, mocking, "He says he'll eat this." Unbelievable pride for a pampered young master. He bared his white teeth, pushing the bowl of bugs towards Yevgen's face. "Why don't you try a bite? If you refuse," he threatened, "all of this will be for your brother." Yevgen stared at the wriggling spoon of bugs with a resolute gaze. He decisively opened his mouth, ready to accept the humiliation to protect his brother. With unwavering determination, Yevgen took the spoon of bugs into his mouth, to everyone's astonishment. The ringleader was stunned, unable to believe what he was seeing. Another patron in the inn also stammered in horror. That idiot, he actually ate it. Boris stared at his brother in shock, only able to utter a single word. Big brother. Yevgen kept his mouth tightly shut and began to swallow the disgusting food. He swallowed with a gulp, completing the challenge in silence. After swallowing, he raised his head, his voice firm. He was Yevgen Gentleman. He continued to assert his identity, the eldest son of Jurkin Jineman, Lord of Longord. Hearing that name, the ringleader's face immediately changed color, and cold sweat poured down him. Yevgen wiped his mouth, his eyes sharp as daggers, and declared, I officially challenge you. The crowd in the inn murmured when they realized Yevgen was the son of Lord Longord, knowing they had caused a big problem. Yevgen coldly demanded the leader reveal his identity. The man stammered. His name was Git Polone. Yevgen declared without hesitation, Of course, now I will kill you. Gait Polone flinched but tried to maintain his smug look, offering Yevgen a chance to redeem himself. He drew his sword and set humiliating conditions, stating that Yevgen must admit defeat and lie prostrate on the ground to be spared. But Yevgen responded with a stern vow that he would make Gait Polone eat the entire bowl of maggots. Boris stood in the crowd, anxiously calling his brother's name. He thought to himself that even though he had seen Yevgen use a sword, he had never seen his brother in a real duel. Boris realized his brother looked like a completely different person, while Yevgen ordered, Gait Polone, draw your sword. Git Polone started to sweat, frantically wondering if Yevgen truly intended to kill him. He was bewildered when Yevgen's sword began to emit a cold blue light. The other guests in the inn also wondered in horror what kind of weapon it was. Git Polone was stunned. It seemed he had heard of such a sword before. He horrifyingly recalled the rumor of a winter sword as Yevgen stood there, surrounded by chilling air and falling snow. Git Polone fell to the ground, realizing the rumor was true and a direct confrontation was too risky. In despair, he decided he had to strike first and roared, charging into attack. Yevgen easily blocked Git Polone's attack with his ice sword. Git Polone was horrified that he could not match Yevgen's strength, who maintained an icy expression. Yevgen gently swept away the weapon, causing Git Polone to lose his balance and stumble. Git Polone stumbled back after the attack. Before him, Yevgen Jineman stood firm, his ice sword in hand emitting a deadly chill. With eyes sharp as knives, Yevgen swung his sword, creating a cold blue streak of light. A single sword stroke cut Git Polone's weapon in half. Git Polone stared in horror at the hilt remaining in his hand, cold sweat pouring down. The surrounding crowd fell silent, while Boris could only utter in shock, Brother. Gait collapsed to the ground, muttering in despair, Impossible. Yevgen coldly raised his sword, declaring, It's over. Farewell. Facing death, Git Polone buried his face in the ground, frantically begging, Please, don't kill me. Yevgen paused, his voice devoid of emotion. Do you admit defeat? Yes, of course. I completely admit defeat, Gait hastily replied. Yevgen narrowed his eyes, giving a brief command. Then do it. He was forced to face the bowl of food from before, and Yevgen ordered, Eat. Boris was stunned and about to speak, but Yevgen cut him off with an icy warning. I will not say it a second time. Git Polone tremblingly held the spoon, scooping up the disgusting food. He squeezed his eyes shut, forced to put a spoonful of maggots into his mouth with extreme revulsion. Immediately, Gait collapsed to the floor, vomiting violently. The bowl of food was knocked over, scattering everywhere in chaos. Boris watched in horror as Git Polone writhed in humiliation. In the terrifying silence, Yevgen suddenly called his brother's name, Boris. Yevgen Jineman coldly ordered them to leave, leaving Gait Polone collapsed in the inn. In the quiet room, lit only by flickering candlelight, a conversation was about to begin. Boris Jineman sat on the floor, softly calling out, Brother. Yevgen turned around, a faint smile on his lips as he replied to his brother, What? Seeing Boris's pensive expression, he asked directly, Are you worried about something? Yevgen approached, gently encouraging, Come on, tell me. Boris hesitated, confessing, I'm glad you're okay, and that you defeated him. But then, he looked up, his eyes full of confusion. You seem so different. Yevgen listened in silence, not denying his brother's observation. Boris clenched his hands, struggling internally. I know it was the only choice, but… No, Yevgen calmly admitted. You saw correctly. No one understands me as well as you do. He sat down next to his brother, his voice deepening. Boris, I've realized now. Father was right. Yevgen began to relay their late father's teachings. You must not let your heart be softened by sympathy. If I could be by your side to care for you forever, I would let you live with a kind heart. Boris froze when he heard the next part. But I cannot be by your side forever. You have your own path, Yevgen emphasized, and to walk it, you must become tougher. He gripped Boris's hand tightly, his gaze firm. If you cannot be a stone, be a clam. Close yourself off so no one can see your inner self. Outside the window, night fell, as if foreshadowing the thorny path ahead. Yevgen squeezed his brother's hand, warning, "This world will not leave you in peace." Boris looked up, his eyes changed, asking back, "So, you've decided to become a clam?" Face shrouded in shadow, Yevgen reluctantly acknowledged his decision. Boris nodded, accepting his brother's explanation. He thought to himself, Yevgen did this because he feared Boris was weak, and now there were only the two of them left. "All right, go to sleep," Yevgen said. "Don't take off your armor, who knows if someone might break in." He placed his hand on the hilt of his sword, stating firmly, "I'll stand guard, you sleep first." Yevgen gently stroked his brother's hair. "I'll wake you up at midnight. Sleep well." Under the bright moonlight, Boris tossed and turned restlessly. While Boris tried to get some sleep, Yevgen quietly stood guard, his back a lonely silhouette. Suddenly waking up, Boris called out in confusion, "Brother? Is it not midnight yet?" He was stunned and bewildered by the unbelievable sight. A tear fell from Yevgen, reflected in Boris's astonished eyes. Yevgen's sturdy back trembled intermittently. He was crying silently by himself. Boris sat up abruptly, unable to believe his eyes. "Am I dreaming?" He's crying. He wanted to go and comfort his brother, but his throat was choked with bitterness, unable to utter a word. Finally, Boris quietly turned over and lay down on the bed. He also burst into tears, whispering, "Because you said you wanted to become a clam." The next morning, the two brothers continued their journey, Boris riding a horse while Yevgen walked, leading the way. Yevgen walked with a pensive expression, a heavy burden weighing on his shoulders. Boris sat on horseback, his gaze fixed on his brother. He thought, "I've never seen him like this. I should say something." Boris curiously asked his brother as they rode their horses, "Yevgen, what kind of flower is that?" Yevgen replied coldly without looking at him. "Cornflower." Boris sadly thought to himself, in the past, he would tell me so many stories about flowers. Could he have forgotten everything? Probably, Yevgen replied curtly, and then they both continued their journey until sunset. As night gradually fell, their horse finally stopped. Yevgen looked around and said, "No town in sight. Looks like we'll have to camp tonight." The two brothers sat silently by the campfire, the atmosphere between them growing heavy. Boris flinched when he heard a strange sound coming from his brother's direction. Yevgen dropped the branch he was holding, his eyes suddenly sharpening. "Boris, take your sword," Yevgen commanded, his voice filled with tension. Yevgen stood up, growling into the darkness. "You've been following us all this way, and you still intend to be cowards? With such numbers, I don't think you need to hide." A mocking voice echoed from the dense forest as a stranger stepped out. "Ha ha! Look at this arrogant brat." The leader swung his axe, roaring orders to his henchmen. "Surround them." Boris's face paled as he saw countless enemies rush out from all directions, surrounding them. Yevgen maintained a terrifying calm, glancing at one of the figures in the crowd. "You seem to be well protected by your subordinates." Called by name, Git Palone flinched, his face clearly showing fear. Another henchman slung an arm over Git's shoulder, sneering, "Ha! You think we're here to help him? Still don't understand the situation?" That guy pointed at Yevgen's sword, which was emitting an eerie blue light. "That sword. That's the winterer your family has hidden, isn't it?" Yevgen thought to himself, his gaze firm. "Just as I predicted, since it's a battle for honor, it's unavoidable." He raised his head, exuding a regal aura. "I am Yevgen Jinneman, the eldest son of Jurkin Jinneman, Lord of Longord. Perhaps revealing my identity was a mistake." The leader sneered, ordering, "What are you standing around for? Take his sword." Hearing the command, the aggressive thugs charged towards Yevgen. Yevgen maintained a cold expression, showing no fear. With a single movement, he easily blocked the attacks of two enemies. He gathered his strength, planting his feet firmly on the ground. Yevgen's eyes were sharp, exuding absolute confidence. "This sword is not something you can even dream of," he declared, swinging his sword to send the enemy flying. A henchman struggled to his feet, smirking. "Not bad. Let's see if you can block this one," he roared and charged forward. Yevgen calmly took a stance, ready to face the direct attack. Suddenly, Boris's shout rang out from behind. "Yevgen, be careful!" From behind Boris, a stranger swung out iron chains. Yevgen couldn't react in time. Both he and his sword were tightly bound by the chains. The chain wielder sneered. "Pretty good, kid, but it's over now. In this state, you won't be able to use any strength." "So, huh?" Before he could finish speaking, a blue light emanated from Yevgen. Yevgen gripped the snowflake-shaped hilt of his sword, activating the power within. A clank echoed, and the iron chains shattered into pieces in the air. The thugs were shaken, crying out in terror. "What the hell was that?" Boris also exclaimed in shock. "The iron chains exploded?" The man with the chains smirked. It seems I'm honored to witness the rumors firsthand. Yevgen explained his power. The legendary power that cools matter to its extreme and shatters it. Ice shard of the Eastern Wanderer. He stood alone amidst the biting frost, his two swords still emanating a chilling aura. Meanwhile, the gang leader looked at his axe longingly. Just looking at it makes my mouth water. He turned to Yevgen, sneering a compliment. You've got some skill, but will you keep your cool when your little brother has a hole in him? He growled, brandishing his axe threateningly at Boris. Boris was stunned when Yevgen had already positioned himself in front of him. Since when? All our actions have been exposed, Yevgen thought to himself. It wouldn't be hard for me to escape alone. But, Boris. Yevgen was surprised by his brother's silence, and softly called, Boris? The gang leader and his cronies burst out laughing. Ha, what's this kid talking about? Boris drew his dagger and declared boldly, That means I know when I need to die. And I won't die by your hands. The gang leader sneered. Oh? Well, let's see if that's true, shall we? With that, he swung his massive axe, charging straight at Boris. Boris's face turned pale, sweat poured down, but he resolutely refused to back down. Yevgen desperately screamed in helplessness. No, curse your own arrogance, kid. The gang leader laughed maniacally. Suddenly, an arrow tore through the air, and Yevgen quickly put his hand up to shield Boris. Boris's eyes widened in horror as the arrow lodged directly into the enemy's throat right before him. The gang leader collapsed to the ground, his axe clattered down, dead before he could even gasp. The cronies were terrified. What? Boss, an arrow? Where did that arrow come from? Amidst the rain of blood, Yevgen held Boris tightly as a panicked bandit screamed, Run, it's an ambush. Yevgen broke out in a cold sweat, thinking to himself, That was close. Who is shooting these arrows? A strange voice echoed from the darkness, praising, You fought quite well, young man. From the forest, 4 mysterious cloaked figures appeared, facing the two brothers. Yevgen immediately drew his sword, taking a defensive stance to shield Boris, and growled, Who are you? A woman in the group pulled down her hood, smiling mischievously. We are your saviors. Couldn't you be a little nicer? By the campfire, Yevgen remained vigilant. If you expect nothing in return, then thank you. The woman chuckled. Besides, what do you have to pay us with? Yevgen's face hardened, realizing a terrifying truth. The people who almost killed us just now were taken down by these individuals in an instant. He continued his skeptical train of thought. These 4 are very skilled. Are they allies? Or enemies many times stronger? A man with a mustache in the group spoke up, commenting that the two brothers looked like rich young masters on a journey. Yevgen just listened in silence, his face still full of calculation and vigilance. Finally, he decided to speak. Thank you for your help. You all seem to be very capable people. 2 members of the group introduced themselves in turn. One was Will's Conv, the other was Joaquin. The man with the crossbow also spoke up. He was Romavac Jewel, also known as Romavac of Bolt. The red-haired woman also smiled and introduced herself. Her name was Janaka Goth, and people often called her Johnny or Nika. When it was his turn, Yevgen hesitated. We are. Romavac shrewdly noticed the hesitation. I guess you still don't trust us. We can leave if you're uncomfortable. Yevgen quickly stopped him. It's not like that. Please, everyone, rest here. The 2 brothers quietly sat down by the fire, but their hearts were still full of vigilance and unanswered questions. Night fell, and the whole group gathered around the campfire. A hand offered a plump red apple to Boris. Take it. The boy hesitantly took it, his eyes still full of suspicion. Janaka Goth sneered. It's not poisoned, don't worry. She asked Yevgen, Is he your little brother? He's a bit too young to be wandering in this wasteland. Janaka explained that they were mercenaries, traveling everywhere to work for money. Yevgen suddenly asked, Have you ever heard of the land of the dead? Janaka exhaled pipe smoke and replied firmly, The land of the dead? Indeed, she told of a glorious magical kingdom named Ganapali, where gold, silver, and jewels paved the streets. However, everything was engulfed in the flames of war. Now, that place was nothing but a desolate wasteland, filled with vengeful spirits and the undead. Janaka concluded with a mysterious smile. The land of the dead is where people enter alive and return dead. The atmosphere around the fire grew heavy after her story. Seeing Yevgen's expression, Janaka teased, Is my story about the land of the dead that surprising? Yevgen's face was serious. Honestly, it's unbelievable that you survived and escaped from there. Romavac Jewel immediately spoke up. Really? Look at the arrowhead on this arrow. He held out an arrow with a tip shimmering with an eerie purple light. Be careful not to touch it, Romavac warned. It's a deadly poison, potent enough to kill a ghost. Janaka waved him off. Stop it, Romavac. It's not like we actually went all the way to Ganapali. We just wandered around there, she said, then held out a golden bracelet. Do you want to see something interesting? Janaka held out a sparkling, intricately carved golden bracelet. She handed it to Boris and said, "Here." The boy thought in surprise. There are even drawings on it. Boris was engrossed in looking at it, and in his mind, scenes of people dancing and a magnificent golden city appeared. He felt a strange energy emanating from the bracelet as the image of the golden city became clearer and clearer. That night, the group found an inn to rest. The heavy wooden door opened, welcoming the tired guest. The innkeeper warmly greeted them. "Welcome, esteemed guests." "Oh my, I was wondering who would arrive at this hour," he said as he saw the group enter. Janica gave a forced smile and replied, "We must look very tired. We ran into some trouble, so we couldn't camp. So we had to travel all night," she added, while Boris secretly thought he only followed because he didn't want to sleep next to a corpse. The innkeeper tossed them a bunch of room keys. Janaka caught them and cheerfully said, "Everyone must be exhausted. Let's go rest." Yevgen took the keys and politely thanked him. The other group members sighed in relief, stretching as they went upstairs. Finally, a good night's sleep. Boris rubbed his eyes, his voice tired. "Brother, I'm really tired. I guess because I'm finally relaxed, I'm about to pass out." Yevgen smiled gently. "Yes, it seems we'll finally get some real rest today. Let's go to sleep," he added, as if to reassure both his brother and himself. No one will be chasing us anymore. In that peaceful moment, a memory suddenly flooded back. A familiar voice called out Boris. Young Boris startled and turned around when he heard the louder call. "Who are you?" a strange man asked young Boris. With a sinister smile, he introduced himself. "I am your uncle. Are you out here playing alone?" He continued to entice. "What's fun about playing alone? Do you want uncle to show you some real fun?" Making Boris ask back curiously. Without a word of warning, the uncle grabbed the boy's shirt. He lifted Boris up, much to the boy's astonishment. Boris innocently giggled, still unaware of the danger. But then, the uncle's true face was revealed. "You'll never forget this. I wonder what kind of expression that person will have." He held Boris and strode towards the forest. Their destination was an old, cold stone well. Boris now had a premonition of something bad, trembling as he called out, "Uncle, uncle." The man held the boy tightly at the edge of the deep, dark well. Boris struggled in panic. "Let me go. I'm scared, uncle." In response to Boris's desperate cries for help was the uncle's insane smile. The boy fell straight down into the endless darkness. Boris woke with a start from the nightmare, realizing his hands were tied tightly behind his back. A familiar voice came from the opposite side. "You're awake, Boris." He was horrified to see his brother also tied up, and quickly asked, "Brother, where are we?" Yevgen delivered a shocking piece of news. "We need to escape from here immediately. Winterer is gone." Boris was stunned. "Winterer, gone? How can that be? Who took it?" Seeing his brother with his head bowed, Boris could only call his name in helplessness. In this perilous situation, Yevgen burst into laughter. "Isn't this just great? Our situation? Ha ha ha," he sneered. Turning to Boris, he admitted, "I'm just a naive child who hasn't experienced life yet." Yevgen continued, hoping his brother wouldn't be deceived like he was. He declared firmly, "From now on, I will teach you what father should have taught." With a murderous smile, Yevgen declared it was time to reclaim everything, principal and interest. At a secluded warehouse, the confrontation was about to begin. Their kidnapper screamed in terror as a dagger plunged right in front of him. Yevgen, having untied himself, coldly declared there was no time for games. He and Boris faced the enemy, growling, "Who locked us up?" Yevgen's gaze was as sharp as a knife, without an ounce of mercy. The man panicked. "They didn't say you could fight. You're not a normal kid." He desperately yelled, "Damn it! If those bastards didn't have a hold over me." Yevgen seized the opportunity, pressing, "Those bastards?" Cornered, the man yelled out the name Janica. Yevgen froze, as if the name had touched a certain memory. He muttered to himself, "You said Janaka?" The man explained in fear. "Janika's gang sold me to the Lacortable mercenary company." He warned that they would soon come looking for the two brothers. Yevgen ignored the threat, getting straight to the point. "Where is Janaka's gang?" The abductor revealed, "Helmer's Tavern. They usually move at night and will be on their way again tonight." Boris, startled, stammered, "Tonight?" Yevgen coldly decided, "Let's go, Boris. We must hurry." On the balcony, Yevgen instructed his younger brother. He ordered, "Hide here and observe everything. Understood?" Boris reluctantly replied. Boris anxiously watched his brother's back as Yevgen entered alone. Yevgen thought to himself, this was a lesson for Boris, so he would know how to punish traitors. He wished he could let his younger brother remain innocent forever, but circumstances wouldn't allow it. Peeking through the wooden door, Yevgen looked into the enemy's lair. Inside, the tavern was noisy, and two mercenaries were discussing a recently annihilated noble family. One of them wondered, "Only Will's Camv and Joaquin. Where are the other two?" In another corner, Yevgen picked up a plate, preparing to play his role. He calmly walked straight towards the table of his two targets. Will's Camv looked up, bewildered, and asked, "Did you call for me, sir?" He turned to ask Joaquin, But his comrade also shook his head, not understanding. Yevgen spoke, setting a trap. "There's a lady outside looking for you," Will's com drunkenly replied. "But Johnny went to meet the merchant. She said she'd be at the village gate." Joaquin began to feel something was off. "That's strange. It's definitely not time yet," Yevgen coldly affirmed in his mind. It truly wasn't time yet, according to their plan. Both Will's cam and Joaquin's faces changed simultaneously, realizing they had fallen into a trap. Before Joaquin could react, Yevgen struck him directly in the face with a tray. Immediately after, Yevgen, without hesitation, pinned his hand to the wooden floor with his sword. Joaquin shrieked miserably. "Ah, my hand!" Will's cam jumped up in surprise, shouting, "Joaquin, who the hell are you?" Yevgen coldly asked the man groaning at his feet. "Sober yet? I'm here to retrieve my sword," he said with sharp eyes. "Where is it? You bastard!" Will's cam roared, swinging his sword and lunging forward. Yevgen didn't flinch, sternly repeating, "I asked where it is." He tightened his grip on the sword hilt, ready for battle. Will's cam yelled, "None of your business," while Yevgen easily blocked the attack. With just a slight push, Yevgen made Will stumble backward. Will's cam couldn't believe this terrifying disparity in strength. Yevgen looked at him with contempt. "Not only are you a petty thief, but you're also brazen." He subdued both of them and issued an ultimatum. "Speak, before I sever your wrist." Will's cam swallowed hard as the icy blade pressed against his neck, while Yevgen smirked. "Well, don't want to?" Joaquin, whose hand was pinned to the floor, also flinched in terror. In the silent space, a piercing scream echoed, but Yevgen maintained his icy expression. Unable to endure the cruel punishment, Joaquin panted and confessed. "It's Janaka who has it," he admitted. "She and Romovac planned to sell it and split the money." Hearing this, Will's cam furiously yelled, "Joaquin, you traitor! Janaka won't forgive you." Too enraged at being betrayed by his comrade, Will's cam swung his sword and lunged towards Joaquin. Will's cam fled, shouting threats. "Just you wait! Janaka and the Black Gauntlet will come for your heads." Yevgen Jinaman pressed his blade against Joaquin's neck, coldly ordering, "Go tell Janaka, the deal is off." Subdued, Joaquin desperately muttered, "Damn it, I shouldn't have gotten involved in this dirty scheme." He began to confess. Janaka went to negotiate about the sword, but that was just a cover. She intended to keep it for herself. Romovac's main weapon is a crossbow, Joaquin explained, so he insisted on selling the sword and splitting the money. He revealed the location. "Go to the north gate of the village at midnight. You'll see the mercenary group Janaka is dealing with. If they see you there," Joaquin warned, "they'll be eager to hand you over to the mercenaries." Finally, he trembled and advised, "Remember this well. Janaka Goth is a dangerous woman." Yevgen thought to himself, his hand tightening on the sword hilt. "I'll surely regret it if I don't get Winterer back." With that, Yevgen plunged the sword into the table right in front of the terrified Joaquin. Yevgen pulled out the sword, coldly saying, "Go, and never let us meet again." Night fell upon the village, the air unusually still. Yevgen and Boris walked together on the deserted village road. Yevgen's face hardened, his eyes filled with determination and calculation. In contrast, Boris couldn't hide the worry and unease on his face. Yevgen stopped, looked into the night, and bitterly thought to himself, "How bitter." His train of thought continued heavily. Everything will only get worse from now on. He turned, raising the blood-stained sword before his younger brother. "Look here, Boris." Yevgen looked at his blood-stained hand. "That is something even I can do. Not just our father. I can also kill," Yevgen said, then let the sword drop, plunging straight into the ground before a stunned Boris. Boris denied in shock. "No, you're not that kind of person." He suddenly realized, "It's because of me. Because you're trying to protect me," Boris thought in horror. Yevgen coldly explained, "When you have someone you want to protect, you'll do anything, even kill." He turned to look at his younger brother. "You should also value yourself. Just as I can do anything for you, you should also be able to do anything for yourself." Boris fell silent as Yevgen continued. "Protect and value yourself more than any treasure." Yevgen's voice echoed along with the image of the army. "So you don't have to die." A decaying face appeared. "So you won't be abandoned." A scene of someone being stabbed in the back. "So you won't be harmed." The specter of death enveloped the two brothers. "So you won't fall ill." Yevgen placed a hand on Boris's shoulder, his eyes firm. "Survive." He looked directly into his brother's eyes, instructing, "Endure this suffering world. Survive to the very end, Boris." Meanwhile, elsewhere, two cloaked figures met under the cover of night. One person spoke. "I don't see Winterer anywhere. Wills isn't here either," he continued. Unaware that the two brothers were watching from the rooftop, Boris spotted a group of people approaching. "Over there." He pointed towards them. "Those people." Yevgen squinted, recognizing them. "It must be the Lacortable Mercenary Legion," Boris whispered anxiously as the mercenaries advanced. I heard they are notorious warriors forged in war. So you have business with us? The mercenary commander named Daraki snarled. A figure from Janaka and Romavak's group slowly stepped forward. Janaka feigned cordiality. Heavens, it's an honor to meet Commander Daraki of the Golden Spear himself. Daraki coldly retorted. You owe us compensation. The people you sold to us have escaped. Oh, really? Janaka sneered. But isn't that your fault for being late? We've already finished our part. Daraki lost patience, signaling his subordinates. I'll make this quick. Either compensate us double the amount, or both of you join the Legion and work for us, he issued the ultimatum. Janaka angrily yelled, What? What kind of scam is this? While Romavak tried to interject, Come on, don't be like that. Romavak tried to negotiate. Compensation is natural, but what can we do for the Legion? Janaka lost her temper, throwing a bag of money. We only messed things up, you petty bastards. Here's your money, she yelled as the bag of money hit the ground. Daraki was unyielding. Not enough. If you don't pay or work, I'll kill you. Romavak anxiously called Janaka, while she gritted her teeth. Damn it, they really want double the money. Wait. Suddenly, Janaka smiled and asked, Wait, Commander Daraki, you're not going to make us work for life, are you? Romavak panicked. Are you serious? You want to be slaves? But Janaka firmly replied, No. She emphasized her question while Daraki silently assessed the situation. Daraki set a condition. Complete the first mission well, and you'll be free to go. We're short 2 people for a contract. Huh. Fine, Janaka chuckled, confidently accepting the offer. She dramatically pulled off her cloak, a challenging smile on her face. Not sure what needs to be done, but as long as we do it well, that's enough, right? The short sword in Janaka's hand suddenly emitted a brilliant blue magical light. Yevgen's eyes gleamed as he spotted his target. Janaka confidently declared, I can do it. Don't you dare change your mind. Suddenly, Yevgen yelled loudly from the rooftop, blocking the group's path. Stop. He landed forcefully, creating a loud noise. Commander Daraki turned, his face stern as he looked towards the uninvited guest. Janaka asked in surprise, What? You guys aren't running away? Without a word, Yevgen charged straight ahead. He drew his sword, his sharp eyes calling her name directly. Give me back the sword, Janaka Goth. Standing next to Boris, Yevgen repeated his demand firmly. Romavak exclaimed in confusion. Why is he here? Yevgen remained silent, his eyes gleaming with cold killing intent. Janaka laughed gleefully, turning to Daraki's group. All right, the person you're looking for has appeared. Daraki merely observed coldly, his gaze full of scrutiny. Yevgen pointed his sword at Janaka, growling, By what right do you buy and sell us? This is a nation without slavery, she sneered. Ha! If you're caught due to incompetence, you should just obediently comply. A rookie daring to lecture me, Yevgen coldly retorted. Whining children should go home to their mothers. Provoked, Janaka screamed. You're the rookie. Boris couldn't hold back anymore. He yelled, You attacked us while we were sleeping? Is that what you call talent? Yevgen raised his sword, his eyes contemptuously sweeping over the group. Are you proud of that? You lot. A memory suddenly resurfaced, of when Romavak and his accomplices first discovered the 2 brothers by the campfire. In Boris's memory, a gentle voice echoed, Take it. Janaka smiled slyly, offering a golden object. Do you want to see something interesting? Back in reality, Boris choked out a shout. How despicable. The boy spun around, pointing at his enemies. You exploited our trust. You're a bunch of swindlers. Stung by the accusation, Janaka and Romavak snarled angrily. You insolent brat. Daraki calmly interjected. It seems we have different opinions, which left Janaka bewildered. Wait, what are you talking about? Janaka quickly regained her smug look. Those 2 have appeared. We're leaving now. Oh, give us our money back first. A mercenary unexpectedly spoke up, shattering her intention. Fight again. Yevgen turned, his eyes cold as he heard Daraki's cruel offer. Fight again, and sell the loser to me. The winner gets to leave. The bald commander declared solemnly. However, whoever loses will be dragged away by us. With no way out, Yevgen and Janaka stood facing each other, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder. Yevgen growled, his eyes sharp as knives. Draw your sword. A fight? Of course I'll win, Janaka replied confidently, drawing her glowing magic sword. But she paused, thinking to herself, No, if I use this sword, Commander Daraki will definitely steal it. Janaka put away her precious weapon, drew an ordinary sword, and yelled, Damn it, don't hate me when I sell your corpse. Corpse. She shot towards Yevgen like an arrow. Yevgen was startled as he blocked the blow, exclaiming in his mind, She's really fast. Janaka snorted, swinging her sword in a dangerous arc. She smirked. You talk a big game, but you're just a rookie. Yevgen gritted his teeth, straining to parry his opponent's relentless, storm-like slashes. Pushed back, Yevgen staggered, He couldn't react in time, taking a vicious blow to the face that splattered blood. Janaka pressed her advantage, unleashing a flurry of sword strikes, giving her opponent no chance to breathe. From afar, Boris called out anxiously, "Brother," the boy thought in a panic. His opponent is too strong. At this rate, heal. Suddenly, Boris startled and looked up sharply. He directed his gaze towards the edge of the forest, wondering, "Who's there?" Amidst the battle, Janaka's murderous words rang out, "Goodbye," leaving Boris stunned. She lunged forward, swinging her sword at Yevgen to deliver the finishing blow. Yevgen gritted his teeth, bracing himself against the approaching blade. From afar, Boris screamed in despair, "Yevgen!" But in that instant, Yevgen's eyes turned sharp and resolute. He swiftly reached out, seizing a fleeting opportunity. Yevgen grabbed Janaka's wrist, his other hand aiming directly for her magic hairpin. Janaka was completely stunned, stammering, "What?" Yevgen gripped the weapon tightly, and a surge of emerald magic began to pour out. He growled, "You're," as a fierce blizzard erupted. "Doing what?" Janaka shrieked in horror as she was engulfed by the energy. Her entire body began to freeze within the chilling magical block. The mercenaries and Boris could only stare wide-eyed, not understanding what that kid had just done to Janaka. Yevgen stood tall, behind him Janaka frozen in eternal silence. He coldly declared, "The match is over." Inside the ice block, Janaka could only scream in silent agony, her face contorted in horror. Clutching the icy weapon he had just seized, Yevgen reaffirmed, "The duel is over." He turned his back on his defeated foe, exhaustion evident in every step. With a determined gaze, Yevgen asserted, "I won." Witnessing everything, Commander Daraki nodded. "All right, I'll see you off." Immediately, Boris rushed to embrace his brother in overwhelming joy. Meanwhile, the man with the chains stared at Janaka in shock, unable to believe his eyes. "Janaka, how did it come to this?" Romovac gritted his teeth, his hand tightening on his crossbow. "Damn it, has it really come to this?" Suddenly, an arrow whizzed past. Yevgen reacted incredibly fast, shielding Boris with an embrace. The two brothers were still immersed in their reunion, unaware of the danger that had just passed. Romovac's eyes flashed with deadly intent. He had decided to break the agreement. The archer roared in anger, aiming his crossbow directly at the two brothers. But instead of Yevgen's cry, another painful scream came from Romovac. "Ah, my hand!" Romovac collapsed, clutching his bloodied arm, while Yevgen coldly approached. Daraki glared at the archer, his voice full of contempt. "How dare you pull a stunt right in front of me?" Then he looked up at the treetops, calling a name. Naya, a dark figure swooped down, plunging into Romovac's arm. From above, Naya, the hidden assassin, silently held her next throwing knife, ready for action. Daraki ordered, "Get that loser." Naya landed decisively, dust swirling around her feet. The assassin's cold purple eyes locked onto her target. Swift as the wind, she glided past the falling Romovac jewel. The marksman only had time to register the utter horror on his own face. With a series of lightning-fast moves, Naya disarmed and subdued Romovac. His crossbow was kicked away, shattering on the ground. Naya stood there, silent and deadly, completely incapacitated. Romovac could only scream in pain. At the same time, a mercenary yelled at Yevgen, "Are you going to abandon us and side with those brats?" The bald leader spat contemptuously. "Or has your maternal instinct kicked in? Clean up this mess." His comrades tried to drag him away while he still furiously screamed, "Let me go!" Yevgen coldly retorted, "For scum like you, it's best you never see your mother again, because you're worse than a maggot." The mercenary was stunned, then roared, "What? You bastard!" The shout made Naya turn her head to look. Boris flinched, as if he had just realized something. He thought to himself, "That gaze in the tree back then. It was hers." Daraki said with satisfaction, "Well done. Let's go, Naya. Our business here is done," he declared as the entire mercenary troop turned and left. Yevgen suddenly mused. "Now that I think about it, Janaka and her gang never asked why my brother and I were on the run." Boris was lost in thought, believing they had intended to deceive them from the very beginning. He worried about the future, now that their horse and money were gone, unsure how they would eat or sleep. Even so, Boris reassured himself that at least his brother was safe and they had retrieved the Winterer sword. Suddenly, a strange hand grabbed Boris's throat from behind, startling him. In a panic, he wondered who was following him as he was thrown to the ground, a suffocating sensation overwhelming him. Boris desperately cried out for his brother while being choked, tears beginning to stream down his face. The attacker's cold purple eyes gleamed in the darkness. The stranger's hand continued to tighten its grip on the boy's throat. Boris was pushed backward, completely helpless. He woke with a start, eyes wide with horror after the nightmare. Boris sat up abruptly under the tree, panting. Still shaken, he clutched his neck and wondered if it was just a dream. Boris suddenly realized his brother was lying motionless on the ground. He softly called Yevgen's name with worry. Boris rushed over in a panic, wondering why his brother was lying like that and if he was all right. Yevgen remained still, seemingly in a deep sleep. Boris breathed a sigh of relief, thinking Yevgen must have just fallen asleep from exhaustion. He carefully took the blanket and covered his brother with it. "Good night, brother," Boris whispered, then lay down to rest beside Yevgen. However, Yevgen was also frowning, sweat beading on his skin, as if he too was tormented by a nightmare. In the nightmare, Yevgen woke with wide, terrified eyes. He writhed in his sleep, sweat pouring from him due to the terrible images tormenting him. Dawn broke, dispelling the darkness, promising a new day in a peaceful town. At a shop, the owner spoke. "Excuse me." Yevgen and Boris entered, and he said, "I want to sell a few items." He carefully placed an object wrapped in red cloth onto the tray on the counter. Unveiling a delicate silver mirror, Yevgen asked, "How much do you think I can get for this?" The shop owner picked up a magnifying glass to examine it. A mirror? Not bad, well preserved too. However, it's old," he said, pointing to the letters YJ engraved on the back. He casually offered, 300 elso. "What do you say?" Which stunned Yevgen. Boris couldn't stay silent. "I think that price is too low." The shop owner immediately changed his demeanor, snapping, "Trying to demand a high price for old goods is robbery. If you don't like it, go somewhere else." Seeing the two brothers turn to leave, he added a contemptuous remark. "Do you think you'll get more than 200 elso anywhere else?" As he mumbled that the mirror was outdated, Boris anxiously called out, "Brother." Boris whispered that the mirror was very valuable, but Yevgen replied with a single word, his gaze firm, "No." Yevgen turned back, telling his brother decisively, 300 elso? Let's take it." Boris was speechless, completely unable to believe his brother's decision. Soon after, Yevgen happily sat before a lavish meal. "Hungry, aren't you? Try this." He picked up a piece of sausage and offered it to Boris, smiling. "Looks delicious." But Boris just sadly looked at the food on the table, thinking to himself, "How can I eat this?" Yevgen thought 300 was a crazy price, while Boris painfully realized this meal was bought by selling his mother's keepsake. Boris was sad, telling himself that dry bread and plain water were enough for him, not understanding why his brother treated him this way. He looked up and asked Yevgen, "When will father contact us?" Yevgen hesitated, replying, It seems it will take a while." He tried to reassure his brother that their father was recovering from his injuries and wanted to see them when they were well. "That's why we should eat this and make sure we're also healthy," Yevgen continued. He assertively used his knife and fork, saying they must always be ready to meet their father at any time. Boris was stunned by his brother's words. He reluctantly agreed. "All right, you're right." But then Boris pressed, "But brother, don't you want to see father?" He questioned Yevgen's melancholic expression. "If not, then why are you so sad?" That night, a nightmare descended, the hands of an enemy in the darkness reaching for Boris. He painfully realized he was being choked again in the terrifyingly familiar dream. The attacker tightened their grip on his throat, their eyes gleaming with cruelty. Boris desperately wondered why this nightmare kept repeating. His thoughts slowly faded into utter darkness. In reality, Boris was cowering in fear on his bed. Yevgen noticed this and quickly shook his brother awake. Boris jolted awake, his eyes wide with horror. Still haunted, he looked at his worried brother and fearfully uttered, "Brother?" In the nightmare, Boris felt a hand grab his collar tightly. He was violently pushed down by his brother Yevgen. Boris gasped for air, trying in vain to remove his brother's hand. He staggered, losing his balance against his brother's strength. "Brother," Boris cried out desperately as he fell backward. He landed sprawling on the cold floor, his body aching. With tears welling up, Boris looked up and painfully called out, "Brother." Before him, Yevgen stood tall, a sword beside him emitting an eerie glow. The cold blue light from the blade signaled an ill omen. "No," Boris screamed in utter terror. He clung to his brother's leg, pleading, "Are you really going to kill me, brother?" Cowering in fear, he sobbed, "I'm scared." "What's wrong with you? Why are you doing this?" But his only reply was Yevgen's glowing red eyes and a cold command. "Wake up, little brother." Boris jolted awake, sitting up in bed. He panted, still dazed. "What happened?" Yevgen stood there, his face clearly showing concern. "Did you have a nightmare?" Horrific memories flooded back. Boris flinched, shouting Yevgen. Sweat poured down. He gasped for breath, still unable to escape the haunting feeling. His eyes wide, he looked around the familiar room in confusion. Yevgen gently asked again, trying to bring his brother back to reality. "Did you have a nightmare?" The memory of Yevgen turning back with a cold gaze flooded Boris's mind. His eyes glowed blood red, a murderous image that haunted him. Boris jolted awake, drenched in sweat, his face pale with fear. He scrambled to sit up, trying to compose himself after the terrifying nightmare. Yevgen rushed over, anxiously asking, "Boris, what's wrong? Are you hurt anywhere?" But in Boris's mind, The image of Yevgen grabbing him with lifeless eyes was still vivid. The moment his own brother's sharp blade pointed directly at him was still etched in his memory. Back in reality, Boris was still stunned, only able to stare blankly at his brother. He quickly lowered his head, lying. "I just fell out of bed while I was sleeping." Yevgen smiled in relief, believing his brother. "You must be very tired, aren't you?" As Yevgen excitedly discussed plans for the day, Boris could only remain silent, his heart filled with confusion. Afterward, the two brothers continued their journey, walking together on the trail. Yevgen walked ahead, his demeanor calm as if nothing had happened. Boris trudged behind, his mind tangled with heavy thoughts. He silently affirmed, "That wasn't a dream, he really attacked me." But his hand was burning hot as if he had a fever. Maybe he wasn't conscious, Boris tried to rationalize. Looking at Yevgen's back, he wondered, "What exactly are you hiding?" Suddenly, Yevgen stopped, turned back, and asked, "Are you all right?" He subtly winced, sweat trickling down his temple, his eyes gleaming with an unusual light as he tried to appear calm. Yevgen suddenly staggered, making Boris freeze in worry. Boris thought to himself, he was now certain that his brother was gravely ill amidst their aimless journey. Anxiety swelled within him, wondering if they would reach safety, or if there was no longer any refuge left. Unable to hold back any longer, Boris tugged at his brother's sleeve. "Hey." The boy mustered all his courage and asked directly, Father isn't coming, is he, brother?" Yevgen turned around, sweat beading on his temples, and could only utter a bewildered ah. Boris wouldn't accept the evasion. He growled, "Be honest with me." He grabbed Yevgen's wrist, pressing in a panic. "What happened? Has father been captured by uncle?" Yevgen looked at his brother with pain, trying to calm him. "Wait, Boris." He took a step back, looking as if he was about to collapse, while Boris realized something was terribly wrong. Chaotic memories flooded Boris's mind, from the summoned monster to the evil spirit beneath the lake. He wondered why his subsequent memories had become so hazy. What the hell happened then? The question echoed in his head as his feet still ran through the dark realm of memory. Boris gasped, trying to recall what horrors he had witnessed at Lake Emera. His train of thought was cut short by Yevgen's voice, who admitted, "Boris, you're right. About what happened to father." Yevgen collapsed onto a rock, his voice breaking. "Father won't be coming. It happened a long time ago." Boris was completely stunned, unable to believe what he had just heard. Yevgen recounted in despair, recreating the tragic scene. He went to a place from which he cannot return. He continued to lie to soothe his brother. "Father is with butler Tulk, so he'll be fine, even without us." In the chaotic memory, Vlado Jinaman and the sorcerer Jongnal stood watching with cold expressions. Boris Jinaman was aghast, unable to believe his eyes. Yevgen screamed in despair, "Boris, look out!" From the ground, a hideous, shadowy hand emerged. The grotesque creature gradually formed with sharp fangs and claws. A colossal summoned monster appeared, towering over and obscuring both brothers. Boris faced the skeletal demon in horror. The boy gasped, sweat pouring from him in fear. The monster's image reflected in his trembling eyes. Its glowing red eyes flashed with murderous intent. Boris tremblingly reached for his sword, trying to resist. But the monster struck first, swinging its claw to attack the boy. Boris squeezed his eyes shut, desperately awaiting death. Suddenly, a hand grabbed him and pulled him back. It was Yevgen, who had saved his brother from the scythe of death just in time. He turned to face the monster, roaring, "Run!" Boris was pulled away but still looked back, screaming in panic. The monster unleashed a devastating attack. Blood splattered. Boris screamed his brother's name in horror. "Yevgen!" In a terrifying memory, Yevgen Jinaman screamed, "Boris, run!" As he faced the giant monster alone. Boris was stunned, realizing it was the lake's evil spirit that his nanny had warned him about. He recalled the old warning. "There's an evil spirit in Lake Emera." Boris's narration echoed, describing the evil spirit's fiery eyes as it swung its wings to attack Yevgen. And in that moment, he turned and fled. Like a coward, Boris ran headlong without daring to look back, his heart heavy with questions about his brother's fate. Regret tormented him. While I was running away like a coward, he was attacked by the evil spirit to save me. The memory faded, returning the two brothers to the quiet reality by the campfire under the night sky. Yevgen gazed thoughtfully at his sword, his face heavy with unspoken thoughts. Boris also bowed his head, the atmosphere between them growing heavy. Breaking the silence, Yevgen suddenly spoke. "When we wake up tomorrow, go your own way." He explained that they had to separate, that he couldn't stay with Boris anymore because there wasn't much time left. Boris looked up sharply, asking in shock, "Not much time left?" His eyes widened, filled with panic and disbelief. With his head bowed, Boris choked out a refusal. "I don't want to," the boy declared firmly. "I'll stay by your side until the very end." Yevgen offered a sad smile, warning, "If I have another fit, I might kill you." His gaze turned cold as he mentioned the source of everything. the evil spirit of Lake Amera. He revealed a horrifying truth, that it was the very thing that had murdered their Aunt Yenny. Yevgen recounted his memory of his kind aunt. I remember Aunt Yenny as a kind and benevolent person, but when she returned from Lake Amera, that person was gone. But the image of her transforming into a screaming monster still haunted him. I still remember it vividly. He shivered, recalling, that wasn't Aunt's voice, but the shriek of a monster. Young Yevgen's horror resurfaced as he concluded it was a madness that could only end in death. Returning to reality, Yevgen looked at the glowing sword in his hand and bitterly told Boris, that will soon be my future too. He handed the sword Winterer to Boris and told him to try holding it, to swing it and see. Boris tried to lift the sword but immediately stumbled under its weight. Yevgen gently placed his hand on his brother's, remarking, I guess it's still too heavy for you. He stood behind him, helping Boris steady the sword, wishing his brother were a little older. Hearing his brother's final words, Boris's eyes welled up with tears. Yevgen sadly finished his sentence, saying he had hoped to stay by Boris's side until he was strong enough to survive alone. He turned and walked away, bitterly admitting his time was running out, while Boris couldn't grow up instantly. Yevgen's face was shrouded in shadow as he delivered a terrifying warning. I'll hurt you soon. Boris was stunned, calling his brother's name in panic and disbelief. The boy gripped the sword hilt, thinking desperately that his brother was about to abandon him. Boris's inner self screamed, begging Yevgen not to leave him alone. Despite everything, Boris shouted with determination. I don't care if you kill me, he sobbed, admitting his weakness. I know what you're thinking, but I can't survive alone. Boris ran towards Yevgen, explaining that their enemies were growing stronger and more dangerous. He hugged his brother from behind, asserting, I want to be by your side. I'd rather be killed by you than. Yevgen angrily gripped his brother's shoulders. Boris bowed his head, enduring in silence. Have you forgotten what I told you? Yevgen roared. What did I say then? Repeat it quickly. Boris bit his lip, trying to hold back his tears. He sobbed in response. You told me to survive. Yevgen said sternly, never say you'll die again. After I'm gone, you must become strong. There will be no one left to shield you, he said, then hugged Boris tightly. You won't be able to rest under any shade anymore. Never trust or let your guard down around anyone. It will be very difficult. But doing all of that is worth it. Because you will live, Yevgen smiled bitterly. Live until you see all the infinite possibilities in your life. Boris looked up, his tear-filled eyes gazing at his brother with pain. Yevgen silently drew his sword, Winterer. And now, this. He offered the weapon towards Boris. I want you to keep it, Yevgen said, placing the sword into his stunned younger brother's hand. If I go mad again, you can use it to stab me. Yevgen sank into chaotic thoughts. My memories are starting to shatter. What did I do during those lost periods? He wondered, did I go mad and scream like a monster, just like Aunt Yenny? Did I threaten Boris? I thought it was morning, but when I regained consciousness, it was already afternoon. When he lit the campfire at dusk, he looked up to find the night stars had risen. Yevgen desperately admitted, I'm slowly turning into something that isn't me anymore. Yevgen thought in his delirium, Boris, I'm scared. He was horrified, imagining himself harming his brother, seeing Boris's corpse when he opened his eyes. Dawn broke, dispelling the night and the nightmare. Boris returned with an armful of dry firewood, his face full of worry for his brother. He saw Yevgen leaning against the tree trunk, his exhaustion evident. Yevgen, why don't you get some sleep? You've been awake for 3 days, Boris urged. Yevgen was startled, as if he had lost all concept of time. Has it been 3 days already? Boris sadly confirmed as he placed the bundle of firewood on the ground. Suddenly, Yevgen resolutely removed a piece of his armor. He handed it to Boris and said, You should keep the snow guard. I don't need it anymore. Boris objected in surprise. But, it's yours. What good is armor to a dying man? Yevgen replied with a cold question. He placed the armor into the hands of his still stunned younger brother. With an urgent gaze, Yevgen pleaded, Promise me one thing. Never seek revenge. He began to explain the bloody factional wars that had torn their family apart for generations. Images of Vlado and Jurkin appeared, testament to the persistent hatred, that tragedy might not have occurred if one side had chosen to forget. Yevgen asserted that the one who took their father's life was a red-eyed demon, and hoped Boris would not be drawn into the family's spiral of hatred. Boris bowed his head, listening to his brother's advice about the future ahead. Forget what's happening now. No, forgive them, Yevgen desperately pleaded. His final whisper faded into the star-filled night sky. Please, let go of everything. Yevgen was exhausted, struggling to stay awake and not fall asleep. He clutched his head, telling himself he mustn't fall asleep, but drowsiness overwhelmed him, and an unfamiliar voice echoed in his mind. What are you doing there? In the illusion, a gentle woman called his name. Come here, Yevgen. Yevgen found himself lying on the grass, and his younger brother, a child Boris, was welcoming him. Returning to reality, Boris's voice whispered in his ear, advising him to rest easy. Boris's hand gently brushed his hair, a gesture full of care. Awakened by that gentleness, Yevgen slowly opened his eyes. Boris quietly retreated into the darkness, giving his brother space. The boy sat down on the nearby grass, silently keeping watch. Yevgen lay there, carefully covered by his brother with a cloak. He lay on his back, his face pensive as he looked up at the night sky. His blue eyes no longer showed fatigue, but gleamed with deep contemplation. An entire brilliant meteor shower was reflected in his eye. Yevgen sat up abruptly, silently gazing at the magnificent spectacle in the sky. He stood up, a new determination evident on his face. Looking up at the stars, Yevgen called his brother's name. "Boris, I know what I can do for you now." Dawn broke, a new day beginning after the long, tiring night. Boris slept soundly, unaware of his brother's silent promise. "Sleep well, I will protect you." In a hazy dream, Boris heard his brother's voice whisper, "No one can wake you." The boy looked around in confusion, seeing only a desolate, empty space before him. Fear surged. Boris was horrified as he realized something was amiss. But then, Yevgen's warm voice echoed again, soothing his soul. "Forget the harsh world out there. Don't cry." A figure approached in the hazy mist of the dream. The nightmare peaked as Boris saw Yevgen collapse, and a cruel voice echoed, "Sleep well. I'll kiss you goodnight." "I'll be by your side," Boris desperately replied in his mind. "If you dream a happy dream, the long night will pass in an instant." Yevgen's gentle words concluded the reverie. Returning to reality, Yevgen stayed awake alone under the meteor-filled night sky. He looked up at the streaks of light passing by, his eyes heavy with thought. The young man quietly knelt, facing the stillness of the night. His gaze was directed towards Boris, his younger brother sleeping soundly by the fire. Beside him, the sword winterer lay still, like a silent companion. In the warmth of the campfire, Boris was immersed in peaceful sleep, completely defenseless. Yevgen gently added firewood, keeping the flame from dying out. He remained seated there, a silent guardian in the night. With a gentle gesture, Yevgen pulled the blanket back over his brother. The image of Yevgen standing guard under the starry sky was reflected in the mind of the sleeping Boris. Suddenly, a mysterious voice called his name, and the sword winterer began to emit a magical blue light. Yevgen stood upright, his gaze resolute, firmly grasping his new determination. A painful memory resurfaced. Yevgen Janiman stood silently before the grave he had dug himself. His face was somber, tinged with sadness yet full of resolve. He bowed his head slightly, as if accepting an unavoidable fate. In the dead of night, a hawk spread its wings and flew away, signaling a momentous event. Little Boris stood amidst the panicked birds, witnessing a horrifying scene. His older brother Yevgen lay slumped on the ground, blood staining his body next to the sword winterer. Young Boris was stunned, unable to believe what he was seeing. His legs gave out, and pain and helplessness washed over him. Boris thought to himself, perhaps he used these very hands to dig his own grave. The narration continued. Yevgen had thrown himself onto the sword, then used all his remaining strength to pull it out. Boris sobbed in his mind. "Why? Why didn't you leave me anything to do? Even your own life. You couldn't live it to the fullest." The boy wiped away his tears, suppressing his immense grief. Standing before the grave at dawn, he whispered his farewell. "Rest in peace, Yevgen." The memory ended. The present Boris stood tall, his gaze hardened. He reached out for the sword winterer, his brother's memento. With a decisive gesture, he forcefully pulled the sword from the ground. Gripping the sword firmly, Boris walked on, carrying Yevgen's will and last wishes. Meanwhile, in a small town, a blonde young lady was yelling, "What? You want me to wear these clothes?" Her maid could only force a smile. "My lady, we are in the countryside, so clothes can only be custom made." The blonde young lady screamed, complaining about having to wear servants' clothes. The maid sadly trudged along the dirt road, thinking to herself that no matter where they went, she would only get the same answer. She resentfully recalled the scene of the clothes chest falling into the mud, telling herself that the young lady always took her anger out on her. Standing in the unfamiliar land of Traviches, she desperately wondered how she could find a dress here. While considering finding a tailor, a voice rang out, catching her attention. "Hey, look at him." Her gaze fell upon a teenager in leather armor, carrying a glowing sword, approaching. The surrounding villagers began to whisper, wondering why a child looked so weathered and was traveling alone. They couldn't take their eyes off the beautifully sparkling sword he carried. The maid thought to herself, "This boy looks about her age." She couldn't believe he carried such a striking weapon. She noticed the deep weariness etched on his face and wondered where he was going. The boy stopped in front of a building that looked like an inn, drawing the maid's attention. Realizing this place seemed to be a disguised tavern, she quickly called out to him. "Hey, young man, wait a moment." She blocked the boy's path, warning him not to recklessly enter a place that looked so complicated and full of dangers. The boy merely glanced at her, coldly replying, "I'm fine." The maid was stunned, wondering why he had such a dark expression. She felt as if a shadow enveloped his face as he turned and walked away. The boy walked straight inside without hesitation. As soon as he entered, he spoke. "Excuse me." A woman behind the counter cheerfully welcomed him. "Welcome." Boris Jineman looked directly at her and requested, "I want a room." The serving girl asked Boris if he was alone, and quoted the room price as 5 silver coins. She explained it was a small room deep inside, but it would be fine for him alone. Boris listened silently, his gaze fixed on the girl. The girl hesitated, as if wanting to say something more, making Boris turn back curiously. He timidly asked, "Is there anywhere here that would hire a child like me?" Boris earnestly said that he didn't need money, just food and a roof over his head. For a moment, Yevgen's image appeared, admonishing, "Boris, survive." His deceased brother's words echoed, "Endure and survive this cold winter." Back in reality, Boris's plea remained. He just needed a place to exist. The serving girl thought to herself, even though he was alone, the boy looked like he had been sheltered since childhood. She wondered what had happened. Boris looked straight ahead, his gaze resolute but hiding endless weariness. The kind girl suggested that merchants or wealthy people in town might need someone for odd jobs or a servant. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the guest table, loudly calling her name. Tanya, a burly man, the blacksmith Punin, raised his mug and called for another pint of beer. Tonya quickly responded, then turned to whisper to Boris, introducing him as the blacksmith Punin. She excitedly said that he had just been complaining about needing an assistant, and invited Boris to go ask him. Tanya smiled kindly, introduced herself as Tanya, and asked the boy's name. Boris hesitated for a moment, then replied, "I am Boris." Punin crossed his arms, squinting as he assessed the boy from head to toe, then asked skeptically, "You look so thin and weak. Can you really handle work at the forge?" Boris honestly replied, "To be honest, I'm not even sure what I'd need to do." Punin smirked. "Ha, at least you're not a liar." He continued to probe. "I immediately guessed you weren't a commoner. Which family are you from? Has there been any recent incident?" Punin narrowed his eyes, revealing, "I've also taken up arms in a few wars myself." He thought to himself, wars often broke out when the wealthy class ravaged each other to seize riches. If this boy had experienced such a bloody scene, it was understandable why his expression was so grim. Seeing Boris's silence, Punin asked directly, "You don't want to share?" Then he decisively slammed his beer mug onto the table. "All right, that doesn't matter." Punin bared his teeth in a challenging grin. "Come to my forge early tomorrow morning. I'll give you work, and if you can't keep up, I'll kick you out." Tanya cheerfully interjected, "Are you two done talking? That's great. Hey, hurry up and thank him." Boris could only bow his head awkwardly, seemingly unaccustomed to this. Outside, the sunset cast its light upon the inn, signaling the end of the day. Tanya carefully placed a steaming bowl of soup on the table. "You haven't had dinner yet, have you? This is our inn's special soup," she gently advised. "You must eat it while it's still hot." Boris silently looked down at the steaming bowl of soup. Tanya smiled and advised, "You know, you need to get into the habit of saying thank you when you receive help." Hearing that, Boris looked up and hesitantly said, "Thank you." Tanya smiled contentedly as she turned and walked away. Her reply echoed beside the empty bowl. "You're welcome. Get some good rest." In his inn room, Boris lay back on the bed after his meal, the sword Winterer resting beside him. He thought to himself about the strenuous work at the forge, Punin's words still echoing in his mind. "See you tomorrow." In his inn room, Boris tossed and turned with his thoughts, wondering if he could trust the kindness of Tanya and Punin. Painful memories flooded back, of how even those closest to him had turned their backs and betrayed him in times of danger. Even the one who had saved his and his brother's lives had sold them out to mercenary. Returning to reality, Boris sat bolt upright on the bed, his heart full of suspicion. Are they plotting something? His face hardened, haunted by the thought that the friendlier someone appeared, the more sinister their plot. Deciding he couldn't sit still, Boris left the inn to check on the forge and the blacksmith himself. Suddenly, a horse neighed loudly, a horse galloping dangerously through the streets. An arrogant knight spurred his horse while shouting loudly, forcing the panicked commoners to scatter. "Get out of the way, you maggots!" Seeing Boris still standing in the middle of the road, the man roared. "Didn't you hear what I said?" Enraged, he spurred his horse directly towards the boy, yelling, "Get lost unless you want to die." Boris was stunned, unable to react in time to the horse charging like a storm. A devastating collision sent him flying in pain. Boris lay sprawled on the ground, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth, as the surrounding crowd watched in horror. The knight looked down from horseback, uttering contemptuously, "What the hell? Do you want to die?" He and his cronies surrounded Boris, unleashing a barrage of insults. "You wretched beggar! What an insolent brat!" Boris bowed his head, enduring the abuse, while the villagers only dared to watch from a distance with worried eyes. But then he raised his head and replied, "I apologize for blocking the way, but You are the ones at fault for riding your horses too fast in a crowded place, Boris bravely stated directly to them. The knight sneered maliciously. Huh? You're quite good with words, aren't you? It seems you need to be taught a lesson. That's exactly what I'm going to do, he growled, raising his riding whip, preparing to punish the boy's insolence. The cruel riding whip swung through the air. Boris took the full force of the devastating lash to his face. The arrogant knight scoffed. This is your end if you dare to mess with us. The henchman grabbed the boy's hair, growling. Do you understand now, brat? In Boris's eyes, an intense hatred flared. He thought desperately, if only I were old enough to wield this sword. No, if only Yevgen were here. But then he quickly dismissed those useless thoughts. The knight ordered, start begging if you've understood the problem. Boris raised his head, his gaze unyielding. What? Pushing himself up with his sword, he told himself he had to stand up, because now he was completely alone. With iron resolve, Boris swore he would not fall before these thugs, for Yevgen had sacrificed himself so he could live. Meanwhile, in a luxurious mansion, a voice rang out, full of annoyance. So, you couldn't get the dress? Lady Roseness de Belnor shrieked. That's ridiculous. What do the nobles here wear, anyway? The maid replied in confusion. I'm sorry. I couldn't even find anywhere that sells dresses. She secretly recalled the image of the boy who seemed to be in trouble on the street earlier. Just then, there was a knock at the door and a man's voice rang out. Rose, may I come in? Roseness happily replied, Yes, father. Count Ganymede de Belnor entered, smiling and saying, I've bought a new dress. Roseness cheered with delight upon seeing the beautiful dress. Dad, you're the best. The count affectionately told his daughter. Put it on quickly. We'll take a stroll around the city tonight. Count Belnor gently taught his daughter that learning the traditions of other countries would make her wiser. On horseback, in the middle of the night, Roseness suddenly asked, But father, where did you get this dress? Camia searched all afternoon but couldn't find it. The count explained that he had bought a custom-made dress, making Roseness curious if nobles here wore dresses. He replied that there were no nobles in Travaches, a fact that stunned Roseness. Suddenly, the count entrusted Rose to a subordinate named Hugh. Hugh, look after Rose for a moment. Hugh carried Roseness, and both watched in bewilderment as the count spurred his horse and galloped away in a hurry. Count Belnor roared, Stop! Echoing through the street. It turned out he had witnessed Boris being beaten to the ground by arrogant knights. Boris lay sprawled, his hand still clutching the glowing sword Winterer. The townspeople whispered, delighted that someone had finally dared to stand up to the thugs. On another street corner, Tanya frantically called Punin when she realized what was happening. Count Belnor, on his majestic white horse, blocked the group's path and spoke with authority. What's all this commotion? The arrogant knight haughtily asked who he was to interfere, while the sycophant tried to shoo him away. The count sharply retorted, Get out of here immediately, you bullies picking on a defenseless child. He warned them, Don't regret this. You brought it upon yourselves. Another knight in the group sneered, Ha! A knight of justice, are we? Then drew his sword. He let out a yell and spurred his horse, charging straight towards the count. Count Belnor observed coldly, then swung his sword, parrying the attack with effortless ease. The knight's eyes widened in horror as his sword blade was completely stopped. The knight's sword was flung away, embedding itself in the ground. Count Belnor asked coldly, Do you still wish to continue? The knight could only grit his teeth in frustration. Damn it. The leader ordered a retreat, not forgetting to utter a threat. Let's go. You beggar count. Consider yourself lucky today. After the ruffians left, Count Belnor turned and ordered, Ask where we can find a doctor. Tanya quickly pointed the way. There's an apothecary in the third house down that alley. Just then, Roseness and the aide arrived, and the girl anxiously called out, Father! Count Belnor lifted his daughter from the horse, gently reassuring and teaching her, Rose, did I startle you? Anyone who sees injustice and ignores it is not worthy of being a noble. The count's lesson seemed to be for Boris as well, making him lower his head in thought. In contrast to her father, Roseness glanced at the boy with a look of displeasure. But I don't like someone so dirty. The scene shifted to a room bathed in morning sunlight. Boris slowly woke up on a soft bed, his face still bearing traces of his injuries. He groggily wondered, Where am I? This floral wallpaper. Is this mother's room? Suddenly realizing something, he began to search everywhere. Boris sprang up in a panic when he couldn't find his treasure. My sword, an elderly woman calmly spoke. The sword? It's under your bed. She held the restless young man back, checking his wounds as she asked, Where is your home? When she heard Boris reply that he had no home, she looked suspicious. Are you a wanderer? You don't look like one, Boris sadly explained. Even if I have a home, I can't go back, so it's no different from not having one. The woman chuckled, teasing. Another young master running away from home over some trivial matter, I presume? The caring woman advised Boris. The count saved you out of kindness, but don't trouble him further. Go home. Boris asked again in confusion. and Miss Willa explained that the one who saved him was Count Belnor from Animerad. Just then, a young maid brought new clothes and cheerfully asked, "Miss Willa, is he awake?" The maid stared curiously at Boris, making him a little flustered. The clever girl chided, "See, you went into those kinds of inns, that's why you got bullied," making Boris secretly wonder who she was. Boris silently looked at the clean clothes the maid had brought him. The maid continued to ask, "How are you feeling? Can you move?" After changing, Boris was led by a servant to the dining room, where the Count invited him to dinner. Count Belnor offered a welcoming smile. "Welcome." Boris clutched his polished sword tightly, looking up at his benefactor as the Count said he was glad he had woken up. The young man realized in astonishment. "That person is Count Belnor, who saved me." A lavish feast with countless delicious dishes had been prepared. A servant began to serve Boris his meal as he timidly sat down at the table. Count Belnor introduced, "If you try this dish, you will understand the flavors of Velcruz." Roseness also cheerfully chimed in, explaining that it was truffle scrambled eggs, a specialty of the region. The Count kindly urged, "You must be very hungry, please eat freely." Boris secretly sighed. It had been a long time since he had enjoyed such a proper meal. He carefully cut a piece of egg and slowly savored the flavor. Seeing Boris eat with good appetite, the Count looked pleased. After the meal, Count Belnor looked directly at Boris and said seriously, "Allow me to formally reintroduce myself." Count Belnor formally introduced himself as Ganymede de Belnor, from the land of Velcruz. He continued, introducing his only daughter and heir, Roseness de Belnor. Seeing this, Boris thought to himself that he should also respond with a formal introduction. He timidly spoke, "I am Boris Jeinman," then reassured himself that they wouldn't know of his family. Hearing the surname Jeinman, Count Belnor paused, his gaze sharpening. Boris was stunned when the Count directly asked if he was from the Jeinman family in the Longourds region. Roseness innocently interjected, asking if his family was so famous, had they perhaps run into some trouble. Boris bowed his head, sadly admitting that his father had passed away and his uncle had taken over everything. Count Belnor guessed that a dispute had occurred and asked about Boris's plans, assuming he couldn't go home. The young man admitted in despair, "I have nowhere to go." He spoke of his makeshift plan to seek out a blacksmith, which made the Count curious about this choice. Boris could only respond uncertainly, plunging the entire dining table into silence. Suddenly, the Count spoke. "Then let me make you an offer." He raised his glass, looked directly at Boris, and invited, "What do you think about coming to Animerad with us?" Boris was completely dumbfounded, unable to believe his ears at the sudden offer. Roseness cheered with delight, but her father merely smiled and said that the final decision was still Boris's. Regaining his composure, Boris asked directly with a look of suspicion, "What makes you offer such a thing?" The Count set down his wine glass, replying cryptically that he could tell him, but it would be better if he didn't ask. Boris insisted, "I want to hear it," telling himself he had to find out this man's plan. Seeing his resolve, Count Belnor conceded, "Well, if you insist." Count Belnor smiled, bluntly declaring, "I want to use you." Boris thought to himself, indeed, this offer wasn't simply out of kindness. He calmly explained that he himself lacked nothing. "I already have a lovely daughter, so I'm not interested in having more children. But I do need a child your age." The Count began to recount a story from long ago, even before Rose was born, about a bet with a friend. They had bet that when both their children turned 13, they would duel with swords, and the loser would have to grant the winner a wish. Many years later, when Rose was born, the Count had completely forgotten the old bet. "Last year, I received news about that friend. He has 2 sons, but unfortunately, the eldest is mentally disabled. Knowing I had a daughter, he cruelly trained his second son to turn him into an excellent young swordsman, because he wants to win the bet and force my daughter to marry his mentally disabled son." The sound of a plate shattering echoed, and an indignant voice roared, "That's ridiculous!" Roseness turned to her father in horror. "Father, is that true? Will I have to marry someone who is mentally disabled?" The Count gripped his daughter's hand, asserting, "Calm down, Rose. I will stake my honor to prevent that from happening." Boris spoke, pointing out the problem. "Don't you think I'm not qualified to duel that young swordsman? I'm not your son either." The Count outlined his adoption plan and promised that if Boris won the duel, he would receive a reward sufficient to live comfortably for the rest of his life. He assured that even if he lost, Boris would not be punished, only needing to quietly leave, which made him ask, "But why me?" He continued to question, because they had only met by chance on the street, and the Count didn't know much about him. The Count replied that while he could recruit dozens of other children, finding someone from a prestigious family was not easy. He explained that they didn't have enough time to teach a new person etiquette and customs upon returning to Animerad. And the final reason, the Count had heard that the Jeinman family had a tradition of exceptionally skilled swordsmanship. Count Belnor believed that Boris must have inherited something valuable as well. He looked directly at him and made his final offer. "So, what do you say? Will you come with us, Boris Jeinman?" Boris remained silent, his face pensive as he considered the fateful offer. His eyes reflected the complexity of a deep internal struggle. He envisioned another life, a quiet life at the blacksmith's, hidden from the world. But then he thought of Anamarad, a strange land full of challenges but also holding new opportunities. However, the most important thing was that he would be able to leave Travaches. This was the land that had taken his father and brother, leaving behind countless losses and sorrows. Standing before the waiting count, Boris's sole desire at this moment was to escape. He looked at Roseness, who would be accompanying him, and made his final decision to escape this land, stained with fresh blood. His late brother's words echoed in his mind. "You must survive, Boris." He made up his mind. "Let's go to Anamarad." The carriage procession began to move, leaving Travaches and heading towards a distant future. Inside the carriage, Boris sat clutching his brother's memento, facing Roseness and the maid Kamia. Roseness secretly pouted, thinking that this boy was both quiet and boring. She turned to Kamia and asked, "Hey Kami, who's older, him or me?" Which left the maid flustered and unsure how to answer. Suddenly, Boris spoke, drawing everyone's attention. "Hey, look at me." He looked directly at Roseness and declared, "You're 12, right? I'm 12 too. So, between us, who gets to play the younger one?" Roseness was stunned, but in her head, she thought, "Well, now we'll have something to argue about on the way." Boris Jineman coldly accepted. "Do as you wish. If you want to be my older sister, I'll call you that," he said, stunning Roseness. "What?" Roseness thought frantically to herself, then hastily asked, "When is your birthday?" "Mine is April 8th, Boris calmly replied. "July 12th, Roseness pouted in disappointment. "Well, you're really boring." Boris unexpectedly turned the tables. "All right, I understand. Then treat me like your elder." Roseness cried out in despair. "What? This isn't what I wanted." While Kamia giggled, lost in thought, Boris wondered if becoming family truly mattered, as their carriage moved forward. Finally, the magnificent Belnor estate appeared before their eyes. Roseness de Belnor happily ran forward, calling out loudly, "Mom, I'm home." She cheered as a noblewoman stood waiting. That woman was Isabeau de Belnor, who simply called her daughter's name softly, Rose. Isabeau gently reminded, "I told you not to run in a dress," and Roseness mumbled an apology. Standing alone, Boris looked up at the luxurious scenery and thought to himself, "This place is truly splendid. I've come so far." He quietly watched the Belnor family reunite, feeling out of place. "No one here will know me." Isabeau turned to her husband, asking, "Is that the child you mentioned?" And Count Belnor confirmed. Lady Belnor suggested, "Since they've had a long journey, let's go inside and greet them," and her husband agreed. While the servants were busy unloading luggage, Boris and Kamia stood silently by the carriage. The Belnor estate appeared in the twilight, signaling a new chapter about to begin. Inside the living room, Boris sat alone in a corner, facing the Belnor family gathered together. The clinking of teacups echoed in the quiet living room. Lady Isabeau calmly said, "We received the message and have heard the story. Please make yourselves at home." Roseness happily snuggled against her mother. "Mom, I've always wanted an older brother, so I've decided to be his younger sister." Count Belnor chuckled. "Haha, it seems you two have quickly become close." He turned to Boris. "While you're here, call me father, and call Isabeau mother," the Count said sternly. "And remember this, you are the youngest son of the fallen Lord Elgulden from the Gavansk region west of Travaches. Due to family ties, you became my adopted son at the age of 5, but your birth father continued to raise you after your mother passed away early. Then your father suddenly passed away, and you came to this Belnor castle." The Count asked, "Have you memorized all of it?" "A few people in the castle also know parts of your story. Our secretary Hugh and Willa, who has looked after you, Kamia, Roseness's maid, along with Garibo, Delamer, and Gromius, who rescued you." Lady Isabeau interjected. "But they don't know everything. The only ones who know the full truth are us and Rose," Count Belnor emphasized. "Therefore, you must answer exactly as I just told you when speaking to others. Do you understand?" Boris reluctantly replied, "Yes," but thought to himself, "It's all a fabricated story, though some details do coincide with my own circumstances." Lady Isabeau turned to her husband. "Please prepare a room for Boris." The Count replied, "It would be wonderful if his room were near Rose's." The Count suddenly had an idea. "Ah, I know the perfect room for him. It's the room on the second floor of the Moonlight Tower." Lady Isabeau was stunned. She reluctantly agreed. "All right, do as you say." Roseness asked blankly, "That precious room?" Count Belnor promised to find Boris a sword instructor soon and urged him to rest and regain his strength. He turned to instruct Roseness to show Boris around tomorrow, as the castle was very large and easy to get lost in. Roseness quickly asked if her new brother needed a servant, which made the Count laugh at his daughter's thoughtfulness. The Count happily announced that he would introduce servants tomorrow morning and immediately choose one for Boris. Boris was stunned, thinking to himself that the Count treated him almost like a real son. He bitterly wondered if his birth father had ever smiled at him so gently. Afterward, Boris was led to an extremely luxurious guest room for temporary rest. He closed the door, separating himself from the outside world. Finally, I'm alone. Boris sighed in relief, sliding down to sit on the floor. Roseness unexpectedly appeared, promising to show him his room tomorrow, making Boris think that even the temporary room for one day was already too good. Looking out the window, he compared it to his old room in Travachi's and wondered about the wealth of this place. Boris's thoughts drifted to the path the carriage had taken, to the forest they had just crossed. A memory suddenly flooded back, and he wondered if there was any place here like the hill where he used to play with his brother. His brother's warm voice echoed in his mind. You have me. But Boris immediately dismissed it, thinking there couldn't be such a place. He recalled his hometown of Travachi's, which only had overgrown fields of foxtail grass. Compared to that place, Anomarad was indeed much more prosperous and its people kinder. But harsh reality pulled him back. But in the end, it's not mine. Standing on the balcony, Boris bitterly admitted that this place would forever be a foreign land. The next morning, Roseness's clear voice rang out. Brother, did you sleep well? Roseness's voice echoed, reminding him of their father's promise to tour the castle and offering to lead Boris to his room first. She cheerfully led the way through the grand hall, asserting that Boris would be surprised by the wonderful room awaiting him. Turning back with a radiant smile, Roseness instructed her new brother not to be careless and to follow her so he wouldn't get lost. Boris just quietly followed, his face showing no emotion. As they walked, Roseness explained that his room was in the moonlit tower to the south, one of the 4 towers of Belnor Castle. All right, this is it. Her voice rang out as they stopped before a large, intricately carved door. Boris's eyes widened, unable to hide his extreme astonishment. He thought to himself in awe, this will be my room? While Boris was still stunned by the opulence, Roseness stood behind him, smiling proudly. Suddenly, hurried footsteps echoed along with a panicked cry. Young lady! A young maid ran over, bowing profusely and apologizing for being negligent and not realizing the young lady had left. Roseness glared at the trembling girl. Camia. You. The girl waved her hand, giving an order. I will go with my brother, you follow at a distance. Camia could only mumble her obedience. Boris stood silently observing, while the maid named Camia breathed a sigh of relief. Seeing the scene before him, Boris suddenly remembered the servants back home. They were as close as family, not fearful like this. Roseness pushed the door open, happily announcing, and this is the bedroom. A splendid, unbelievably luxurious room appeared before Boris's eyes. The girl pointed to the wardrobe and said that they had prepared everything, promising to show him how to dress appropriately. Roseness proudly declared this was the best room in the castle, which had been promised to her when she turned 15. Roseness smiled and told Boris, so until then, don't mess things up, okay, big brother? Boris thought to himself, even though he knew he would leave next year, the girl still called him big brother so naturally. Roseness also had her own thoughts, that currently they were close siblings, but just next year, both would become strangers. Returning to the tour, Roseness excitedly showed Boris. Look, this room has an amazing view, especially at sunset. The girl continued to lead the way to the fragrant kitchen, where the servants respectfully bowed. And this is the dining room, Roseness explained. It's too big, so usually we eat in a smaller room. The girl thoughtfully wondered if she had shown him everything yet. Boris immediately reminded her. I haven't seen the library yet. A servant informed them that the Count was out, so they could enter the library, which made Roseness exclaim with delight. The Belnor family library appeared incredibly magnificent and overwhelming. Inside was the Count's imposing desk. This place is full of books, Roseness happily introduced to Boris. Boris just quietly thought, I know what a library looks like. Memories flooded back. He remembered the library at home, a place he never dared to approach because his stern father was always there. He found it strange that he now missed that cold father. Perhaps it's because I'll never see him again. Boris sadly concluded his thoughts. Suddenly, a shout rang out. Lanzi! Startling Boris. A strange teenager appeared, angrily pointing at Boris and yelling, Are you reading my father's books without permission again? Boris quietly closed the book in his hand. A new servant named Ianami Rosenkrogens was caught secretly reading books in the library. Roseness puffed out her cheeks, boiling with anger. How dare you! She screamed, throwing a book onto the floor in front of Ianami. Roseness continued to scold him for overstepping his bounds, while Camia stood anxiously behind her. The girl threatened to tell her father to expel him from the mansion. Observing from a distance, Boris wondered if he had snuck in because he knew the Lord was absent. Contrary to expectations, Ianami calmly replied, I apologize, young lady. He continued with an expressionless face. I was wrong to do so. Boris noticed Ianami's unusual attitude. He showed no hesitation, and his apology lacked any sincerity. Roseness reluctantly conceded, saying she would overlook it this time because her brother was present but warned him not to repeat it. "All right. I'm leaving," Ianami replied curtly and turned away. Boris and Ianami walked together, leaving the library. Walking beside the new servant, Boris glanced at him, his thoughts still lingering. He felt that this person didn't seem to belong here. Just like himself, his thoughts brought Boris back to a past memory. Young Boris standing before all the household staff in the main hall. In the flashback, Count Belnor placed a hand on his shoulder and solemnly introduced, "This is Boris de Belmore, whom I adopted 7 years ago." The Count's voice echoed, ordering everyone to serve Boris as diligently as they served Roseness. The old butler respectfully bowed in obedience. "Yes, my lord." Count Belnor turned to look at young Boris. "Boris, you will also need a personal attendant. All right. Now choose someone yourself." A memory flooded back to Boris. The first day he arrived at the mansion, Count Belnor declared that he would also need a personal attendant. In the magnificent great hall, the Count urged, "All right, choose." Boris's gaze swept across the line of servants, stopping at a white-haired teenager with emotionless red eyes. He secretly calculated that having someone his age would be easier to manage because they wouldn't be too scrutinizing. Boris considered that a slightly foolish person would be easier to deal with, but then he wondered why he was thinking that. His thoughts suddenly returned to the present, to the servant he had just met in the library. He had a truly distinct aura. Flashing back to the past, a naive Boris looked up at the Count and said, "I hope it will be someone my age." The Count pondered the boy's request thoughtfully. He pointed to the end of the line. "The child at the end is Ranzier. Do you want to take him?" And Boris immediately replied, "Yes." Count Belnor then called out, "Ranzier, come here." The white-haired youth silently stepped forward as ordered. He bowed before Boris and introduced himself. "Young master, I am Lanzi Rosencrantz." The Count placed a hand on Boris's shoulder, solemnly tasking Lanzi to serve his new young master with all his might. With an inscrutable smile, Lanzi respectfully replied, "Yes, master." Boris recalled that despite the subservient appearance, he felt no respect whatsoever in the new servant's voice. Now, he understood why Roseness reacted so strongly to Ianami. The memory ended with the image of the Count putting his arm around him. "Young Master Boris, let's go to your room." Lanzi looked directly at Boris and began, "I have a few things I need to inform you about." In the splendid room, sunlight streamed through the large window. Ianami invited Boris, "We've arrived, please take a seat first." The boy replied cautiously, "I'm a bit thirsty." Ianami quickly brought a glass of water. "Here you go." Boris sat on the sofa, draining the glass of water while Ianami stood silently observing. Setting the glass down, Boris got straight to the point. "What do you need to inform me about?" Ianami began the information session. "First, I will tell you about the master's family." He explained the Count's schedule, from patrolling the territory once every 10 days to foreign trips lasting months. Boris listened intently as Ianami listed the Count's frequent destinations, emphasizing that he was rarely in the castle. "He is generous, but not the type to easily forgive anyone who oversteps their bounds." Boris nodded inwardly, acknowledging that the Count was indeed such a person. Next, Ianami moved on to Lady Belnor. The lady is almost always in the mansion. She leads an extremely disciplined life, waking and sleeping very early. She is someone who can get angry over the smallest mistake. "Please be careful," Ianami warned, making Boris understand that he had to be wary of this difficult lady. As for Lady Roseness, Ianami hesitated, leaving the sentence unfinished with an enigmatic smile. "I'm sure you already know what she's like," he deflected, making Boris wonder inwardly, why is he suddenly so reserved? Boris guessed that Ianami didn't dare speak recklessly after the incident in the study, inwardly acknowledging his talent for getting out of trouble. Ianami quickly changed the subject. "Next month is the lady's birthday, and many guests will be arriving from the capital." He emphasized the importance of these noble guests, especially relatives from the Marquis Krazane's house, the lady's family. Ianami announced the upcoming ball and asked Boris if he knew how to dance. A ball, Boris thought to himself. In his homeland there was only war and mutual suspicion. He figured no one there would learn to dance, and Ianami realized his new young master was unfamiliar with such things. Ianami then offered, "If young master wishes, I can teach you." Boris was a little surprised by the servant's offer. He quickly changed the subject, beginning to inquire about Ianami's work. "What work have you done in this castle until now?" Ianami replied that he had served Count Belnor for about a year. Boris continued to ask about his past, learning that Ianami came from Celtica. Celtica, the capital of Anamarad. That's really far, Boris mused, then abruptly asked directly, "Are your parents still alive?" Ianami paused briefly at the personal question. He answered vaguely that he didn't know their current situation. Boris felt a bit of regret, blurting out, "So now you're all alone." "I have a younger sister," Ianami corrected. He added that, thanks to the master's kindness, his sister was also living in this castle. Ianami then asked for permission. "Young Master Boris, if I may, I would like to visit my sister for a moment. Boris unexpectedly replied, I want to go with you. Ianami was completely stunned, confused about how to react. After a moment of silence, he asked a strange question. Young Master Boris, are you a gentleman? Boris was dumbfounded, thinking to himself, what? Why would he ask such a question? Ianami smiled. I will believe that you are a gentleman. Before them was a little girl named Lanzim, quietly sitting by a sun-drenched window. The little girl turned, her lifeless red eyes looking towards them with an indifferent expression. Ianami led Boris to the room's entrance, calling out softly, Lanzime. Hearing the call, the little girl subtly turned her head. Her red-rimmed eyes remained fixed on the outside scenery, devoid of any emotion. Boris immediately realized, the little girl isn't even looking this way. He secretly judged, the girl looked as frail as a flower bud, her face pale and expressionless like a wax figure. Ianami invited Boris to sit down, while Lanzim remained motionless in the distance. Suddenly, the girl spoke, telling of a beautiful blue bird that had just flown by. Ianami listened to his sister's story with a warm smile, saying that she had really wanted to show her brother its sparkling wings. Boris stood frozen, witnessing a completely different Ianami. He couldn't believe that his attendant had such a gentle side. He shared every small joy of the day with his sister, telling her about the good things in the world. Boris realized that despite his cold exterior, Ianami still had things he cherished and considered beautiful. Standing in the same place, Boris felt like an outsider, lost in the private world of just the two siblings. Seeing his sister happier, Ianami gently advised her to go rest for a nap and dream of beautiful flowers. Hearing the words about dreams, Boris could only stare blankly and wonder, what the hell is he talking about? Boris thought to himself, that must be a secret only the two of them know. Ianami gently carried his sister Lanzime in his arms. He laid her down on the bed, wished her good night, and hoped she would have beautiful dreams. After tucking her in, Ianami turned away with a gentle smile. Then he turned back to call Boris, his expression becoming more serious. Young Master Boris, let's go. The scene shifted to outside the magnificent Belnor mansion. In a flashback, Roseness irritably crossed her arms and said, Lanzime, I hate that girl. Boris calmly asked, why do you hate her? Roseness snapped. She looks like an idiot, she continued to complain. I hate people like her. She can talk but refuses to. Every time I see her lifeless eyes, I just want to flick her forehead. Boris silently thought, so the girl can talk. She doesn't look well at all. Roseness was still angry. Probably, but maybe she's just being lazy. The only thing holding her back is her limp, but she doesn't even leave her room. She continued to list her grievances. She doesn't read, doesn't embroider, doesn't study at all, but was interrupted by the maid Kamia. Lady Roseness, it's almost snack time. Hearing about food, Roseness immediately brightened up. Oh, then I must go right away. Today's snack is strawberry shortcake. While Boris sipped his tea, Roseness continued to grumble. Those two siblings need to be more grateful. Even though his sister does nothing, Lanzy still treats her like a golden goose. Suddenly, Roseness remembered something. Oh, that's right. She turned to inform Boris. Father finally found a sword instructor for you. I heard he'll be here tomorrow morning. Boris only replied with a, is that so? While Roseness excitedly ran off, adding, he's very skilled but quite eccentric. Roseness mused, maybe I should insist Father let me learn swordsmanship too, while Boris secretly thought, with her personality, I wonder if she'll learn anything. Boris walked alone on a cool, tree-shaded path. He thought to himself, being indoors for days, my body feels stiff. If I practice swordsmanship now, it'll be tough. His gaze suddenly stopped at something ahead. In front of Boris was an ancient walnut tree with lush foliage. Seeing the ripe walnuts, he wondered if he should climb up to pick them. Boris hesitated, recalling how Yevgen used to carry him on his shoulders to easily pick fruit. Suddenly, a shower of walnuts, seemingly from nowhere, rained down directly on the boy's head. Boris jumped in fright. What was that? Is there something up there? He strained his eyes, following a shadow that darted by extremely quickly, a bad premonition rising in his heart. Terror washed over him. He feared it was another monster like the one at Lake Emera. Just then, a voice called out from the tree. Hey! A strange man sat perched on a branch, smiling as he asked, do you like walnuts? His face looked quite friendly but also had a mischievous quality. Boris looked up, sighing in relief when he realized it was just a person. He let out a self-deprecating laugh. Of course it's a person. What nonsense was I thinking? The stranger suddenly yelled, making Boris jump. Hey, pick up all the walnuts! He jumped down from the tree, casually saying, Tsk, I told you to pick them all up. Too many fell. Boris froze, unable to believe his ears. Who is this shameless? Just suddenly ordering me around. The strange man nonchalantly ordered, it would take me all day to pick up this pile by myself. You, lend a hand. The strange swordsman spoke. It'll probably take me all day to pick all of these by myself. You, give me a hand. He winked mischievously, What are you looking at? Is there something on my face? Go on. Pick up the walnuts from the ground. Boris could only remain silent, bewildered by the stranger's abruptness. As he bent down, the swordsman quickly shouted, "Hey, if you touch the walnuts with their shells on, your hands will get blisters," he explained, spreading out his cloak as a mat. Boris suddenly remembered. I recall hearing Yevgen say something similar. He secretly thought this guy was strange, while the swordsman was planning to shake the tree a bit more. After harvesting, he cheerfully said, "I think we've picked almost all of them." The swordsman hoisted the bag of walnuts onto his shoulder and decisively gestured. "Let's go." Boris hurried after him, asking blankly, "Where are we going?" "That castle over there," he pointed, making Boris even more curious. "Why are we going there?" The swordsman asked back without turning his head. "Why do you ask? Do you know where that is?" Boris was astonished, unable to believe that this person didn't recognize the place. He scratched his head, trying to recall the castle's name, making Boris secretly judge him as both odd and clumsy. Boris deduced that a swordsman carrying a longsword heading towards Belnor Castle must be the new master. He found this approach better than a formal meeting, and decided this was an opportunity to get acquainted. The swordsman proudly showed off his spoils. One should never go to someone else's house empty-handed. Boris cheerfully chimed in. Will the hosts like them? As they walked, they chatted animatedly about the meaning of gifts. They walked together down the tree-lined path, heading straight for the magnificent castle. The magnificent Belnor estate appeared from behind the lush green trees. Standing at the gate, Boris cleared his throat and ordered, "Inform father that we have guests." The guard immediately bowed. "Yes, young Master Boris." Boris thought to himself smugly, believing his father would be surprised by his identity. The strange swordsman suddenly spoke with a mischievous smile. "What are you looking at?" A servant stepped out to block their path, revealing the harsh truth. "Young Master Boris, I was ordered to escort the guest to the reception room." He knew from the start. The servant continued to announce while leading the way. "Lord Ganymede is waiting with Lady Roseness." In the luxurious drawing room, Count Belnor extended a welcome to the new guest. Whitler smiled in return. "Thank you for inviting me. I've brought a small gift." Roseness exclaimed, "Oh my," in surprise as an entire bag of walnuts spilled onto the table. Whitler merely smiled meaningfully at her reaction. He began a fabricated story. "It's called the secret fruit. Each one you eat will make you grow 1 year older." He continued to tease. "If Lady Roseness eats 8 of them, she'll turn 20 years old overnight." Boris thought irritably to himself, unable to believe this guy was using walnuts picked from the forest to trick a child. But then he paused, realizing something absurd. "Huh? But how do you know Roseness is 12 years old?" Whitler winked confidently. "One glance is all it takes. You're 12 too, aren't you?" Boris replied yes, and then reassured himself that this guy must have heard it from his father beforehand. While Roseness was still daydreaming about growing up, Whitler warned, "Don't touch them with bare hands, or you'll get blisters." At that moment, the Count called the guest by name, clarifying his identity. "Instructor Whitler, this is my son, Boris, and my daughter, Roseness." Whitler smiled, casually revealing, "Whitler isn't my real name. It's just a pseudonym I once used." When asked about his true identity, he refused to answer and mumbled that perhaps he should change his pseudonym too. He mischievously suggested, "Or how about you just call me Instructor Walnut?" Count Belnor nodded in agreement, then formally said, "Nonetheless, thank you for accepting my invitation. I am counting on you to instruct my children." Whitler looked surprised as he glanced at Roseness. "Your children? Wait, your daughter will also be studying?" The Count confirmed that both children would train together from now on. Whitler turned to ask the Count, "So, shall we start the lesson today?" But then he decided for himself, "No, it's fine, let's start tomorrow. Today, getting acquainted is enough." Whitler announced that he would not use honorifics with the children, and the Count agreed, after which he stood up. He turned, his gaze directed at the servant. "You, take me to my room, we need to talk." Boris looked up, unable to hide his surprise at the instructor's demeanor. Just then, Enemy Rosenkrogens brought a tray of shelled walnuts. "This is a gift from the kitchen." Whitler ate while making conversation. "I heard you're a servant, but you look like a young master. Do you want to learn swordsmanship?" When Ianami refused, stating he hadn't received orders, Whitler sneered, "I'm offering kindness, and you're kicking away your own good fortune." Suddenly, Whitler casually uttered, "Moonlight Tower, what a beautiful name." Boris was startled, and questioned how he knew the tower's name, to which Whitler only replied mysteriously, "Because I am an instructor, and instructors know everything." Boris thought to himself, from demanding to tie his hair to enticing a servant to learn swordsmanship, nothing seemed related to the lesson. His train of thought was interrupted when he unconsciously called out his own name, Boris. Whitler immediately caught on, his eyes sharpening. "Boris, you are?" He asked a direct question that left Boris stunned. "From Travaches?" Whitler suddenly asked Boris directly about his origin. Are you from Travachi's? Boris froze, startled by the instructor's sudden question. Whitler smirked meaningfully, as if he already knew the answer. Aren't you? Despite his surprise, Boris secretly thought this was part of the plan, and admitted it. Whitler excitedly affirmed, I knew it. You and the girl yesterday aren't blood siblings, are you? He continued his sharp deduction. The girl is the biological daughter, so you're adopted. Guess how I knew? Boris remained silent, wondering if the instructor was messing with him. Ayanami, the servant standing nearby, spoke up to explain. Isn't it because he's the same age as Lady Roseness? Whitler praised Ayanami's intelligence, then threw out another tricky question. So how did I know you two were the same age? The smug instructor declared. Because I have the superpower to guess people's ages. Boris secretly dismissed it, thinking the count must have told him, then challenged. Then do you know how old Lanzi is? Whitler pretended to concentrate. Let's see. He pointed at Ayanami and stated confidently. 12 years old. He's even a few months older than you. To verify, Boris turned to ask Inami his birth month, calculating silently in his head. Inami honestly replied, I was born in February. Boris was completely stunned that Whitler had guessed correctly, and quickly asked again. So you also know that Rose is younger than me? He secretly thought Whitler would definitely be wrong this time, as Rose had always called him older brother. But Whitler just burst out laughing. Dead wrong. She was born 3 months earlier than you. Boris was astonished once again, secretly confirming that Rose was indeed born 3 months earlier. Whitler smiled meaningfully, making Boris even more confused about what secret he was about to reveal next. Whitler smirked. You have some talent. If you do well, you could become an excellent swordsman. Boris asked in surprise. You can tell just by a glance? Whitler explained. I say that because of the way you lie. Boris immediately retorted. What do lying and swordsmanship have to do with each other? The instructor continued to reason. Do you think a renowned swordsman only knows how to swing a sword? Being good with weapons isn't everything, he explained. No matter how talented you are, you will fail without keen instincts and quick thinking. Whitler looked directly at Boris and asked, What do you think people who know how to stay one step ahead are best? Then he pointed at the young master and declared loudly, Lying, just like you did. Whitler gave an example. Take the girl from earlier. She wants to be an adult so much that my lie worked instantly. Boris asked blankly, So, Roseness wants to be an adult? Ianami stood behind, silently observing this strange conversation. Suddenly, Whitler let out a huge yawn, breaking the tense atmosphere. He stretched and said, I'm tired from talking so much. That's my bedroom, right? I'm going to catch some sleep. With that, Whitler turned and left, leaving Boris and Ianami frozen. Boris could only turn to the servant with an expression of utter bewilderment. What? Meanwhile, at a dilapidated mansion, a gloomy atmosphere prevailed. Inside, a broken chandelier hung precariously in the dark room. A mysterious long-haired man stood by the window, his voice deep and hoarse. Summer is over. His face revealed a look of hardship and an iron will. In silence, the man lit a candle, its flame illuminating the stillness. Then he slowly walked away, his silhouette merging with the mansion's shadows. In the dark room, Vlado Jinneman asked his subordinate, So, are there any results yet? And Tulk replied, Yes, master. Vlado secretly smirked. Calling me master as if nothing happened. He smugly thought that this traitor could be his best partner. Vlado coldly reiterated. He betrayed his master, Jurkin, who is also my brother, then called Tulk, who merely bowed in obedience. Tulk began his report, stating that Boris had arrived in Anamarad. He added that a boy carrying a white-sheathed sword had been confirmed to be with an Anamarad noble. Vlado Thidu said, A white-sheathed sword. So Boris has winter air. Tulk continued that the noble was using a false name, but he would soon find out. Vlado ordered, Good, hunt down Boris and the sword. Vlado further warned, Yevgen might be carrying Snowguard, so be careful. Tulk respectfully bowed. Yes, master. After receiving the order, Tulk silently walked away, his figure gradually disappearing. Vlado stood alone in the silence, lost in dark thoughts. A sinister smile appeared on his lips as he whispered into the void. Jurkin, what do you think? Vlado's solitary figure walked through the ruined hall. He wondered, Isn't he a disloyal butler? Memories flooded back. Vlado recalled Jungnal using magic, while he stood over his brother Jurkin, who had fallen after Tulk's betrayal. Returning to the present, he reassured himself, Jurkin is dead, this mansion is mine, my sister's spirit no longer haunts me. But a feeling of unease crept into Vlado's mind. He wondered in confusion, Why do I feel a chill in my heart? Suddenly, the chime of the pendulum clock rang out, breaking the silence. The cold chimes continued to echo throughout the hall, reverberating against the dusty crystal chandeliers. In the darkness, a mysterious voice whispered Jurkin as the last candle flickered out. Do you hate this world too? Belnor Manor stood tall and imposing under the cloudy night sky. Boris lay on his bed, thinking to himself about the eccentric instructor. If Lanzi hadn't woken him up, he would have just slept in his own bed. He resolved, I need him to train me carefully, so I can fight and win for Roseness. Meanwhile, Roseness was also contemplating a match. Even though this is just an agreement between me and this family, I don't necessarily have to win. Boris rolled over, strengthening his resolve. But I will try my best. That will give me an advantage to survive. He got out of bed, recalling his brother's words. If I want to survive, as Yevgen told me. Suddenly, Boris froze as his gaze fell to under the bed. He quickly knelt on the floor, searching for something anxiously. His eyes widened as he noticed a familiar empty space. It's not here. Boris was stunned to realize the harsh truth. The Winterer. It's gone. He frantically rushed out of the room, sprinting down the wide corridor. Gasping for breath, Boris desperately yelled, How can this be? I've lost the Winterer. He clutched his head, tormented. That was an important item Yevgen gave me. A painful memory flooded back. It hasn't even been a month since I buried Yevgen. The last image with his brother appeared vividly. I can still clearly remember his last words. Yet I let my guard down. Standing alone in the corridor, Boris blamed himself. Is this all I can do? Am I useless? But then, despair gave way to reason. There's no way the sword just disappeared on its own. Someone must have taken it. Who could it be? He recalled that the sword had been carefully stored under the bed all day. Boris narrowed down the suspects. In that case, the culprit must be someone who entered my room today. That would be me, Lanzi, and… In Boris's thoughts, the last suspect emerged. The sword instructor. He was shocked and blamed himself. I'm such an idiot. How could I leave someone I just met alone in my room? Realizing his mistake, Boris rushed out of the room, determined. I have to find him before it's too late. Walking in the night with a candle, Ianami was startled to see his young master. Young Master Boris? Gasping for breath, Boris said, Sorry for waking you in the middle of the night, but I need your help with something important. Boris decisively ordered, I want you to find Instructor Walnut immediately, and Ianami promptly obeyed. But before that, you can't go out like this, Ianami said, showing concern for Boris's thin attire. He kindly draped a cloak over Boris's shoulders, who could only agree in surprise. Ianami also carefully handed Boris a sword for self-defense, which slightly surprised him. After getting ready, Boris urged, Let's go. They arrived at the instructor's room, but Ianami announced, He's not here. It seems he's already left his bedroom. Without a word, Boris frantically tossed the blankets and pillows aside, searching in vain. He continued to search the wardrobe, while Ianami remarked, Are you looking for something? There's nowhere to hide anything in this room. Boris stopped, his eyes sharp as he affirmed, Lanzi is right. The Winterer isn't here. I'm certain the instructor took it with him. They stepped into the corridor, Boris wondering, where did he go in the middle of the night? Could he have fled? Boris began to deduce, Lanzi, if someone wanted to leave through the castle gate, they'd have to pass through the security team, right? Ianami confirmed the main gate was strictly guarded, but also revealed, the north gate is also open, but there are security guards in the garden. The north gate? Boris repeated, a glimmer of hope sparking in his mind. He asked, his eyes directed towards the night garden. So you mean it's possible to leave through that gate? Under the silvery moonlight, the stone path leading to the north gate appeared quiet and mysterious. Ianami led the way, announcing they were nearing the north gate. Boris gripped the hilt of his sword tightly, silently vowing not to hesitate to act. He told himself that if he couldn't protect the memento from his father and brother, he would no longer be worthy of the Jinnaman name. But then, worry struck. He feared the thief had already made a clean getaway. Suddenly, Ianami exclaimed in surprise, calling his young master's name as they both discovered something. Over there, Boris squinted, focusing on a figure in the distance. In an empty courtyard, Instructor Whitler was wielding brilliant sword strokes under the moonlight. Boris was stunned as he recognized the sword in his hand. Is the Winterer? He couldn't believe his eyes. Both Boris and Ianami were speechless at the unbelievable sight. Ianami turned to ask, then thought to himself that this sword emanated an evil aura. He's right, Boris bitterly admitted in his head. He realized this was the true form of the Winterer, completely different from what he had known. The blade emitted a brilliant yet murderous light, like moonlight and a meteor shower. Boris covered his mouth in horror, finally understanding that the Winterer was not a righteous sword. Nevertheless, his eyes still shone with unshakable determination. Hey, a low voice echoed from the figure. Instructor Whitler had spotted them, coldly issuing a warning. If you've seen enough, then get lost. He turned around, directly facing the two stunned teenagers. Pointing the sword forward, he growled, What are you two doing in the garden at this hour? Hidden behind the bushes, Boris Jinaman and Ianami Rosenkrogans watched with bated breath. Boris stepped out, declaring boldly, That sword is mine. I know you wanted to look at it, but please return it. Whitler replied mockingly. You lost your sword. Are you trying to say you found it? He smirked provocatively. Do you have what it takes to get it back? Boris retorted firmly. I don't understand what you're saying. I thought you were my instructor, not a thief. The man's smile grew more cunning. Quite a brave little brat, aren't you? He raised the Winterer, warning. However, a child shouldn't wield a sword. It will only seek your blood. Whitler's gaze suddenly sharpened. Answer me. How did you get this sword? Is this the long-hidden sword of winter? Boris stood in the shadows, frankly admitting, if you're talking about the Winterer, then yes, it is. Whitler chuckled, as if he already knew everything. Ha! Then your surname must be Gineman. Boris coldly retorted, the Gineman family, who hid the Winterer from the world. What does that have to do with you? The boy held his head high, asserting, I am Boris de Belnor, your future student. You don't need to know anything more. Whitler fell silent, his inscrutable gaze fixed on Boris. His hand tightened around the hilt, and the Winterer began to emit a chilling aura. Boris was stunned by the power being unleashed from the family heirloom. I will not return the sword, Whitler declared coldly. Without hesitation, Boris retorted, I will take it back at any cost. Then come and get it, he challenged with a sharp gaze. Boris broke into a cold sweat, thinking, threats are useless now. Even if I attack, I have no chance of winning. However, even if I die here, I will not let the Winterer be stolen. With a resolute gaze, Boris declared, if you want to leave here in peace, you must kill me now. Instructor Whitler paused for a moment at the boy's firm declaration. He stood towering there, holding the Winterer, looking down at his small opponent. Suddenly, Whitler burst into hearty laughter at the unexpected audacity. Boris and Ayanami could only stare at each other, completely bewildered by what was happening. Wiping a tear from laughing so hard, Whitler spoke. Look at you. It's hard to find a child like you these days. He suddenly squatted down, meeting Boris's gaze at eye level. Startled by the sudden action, Boris maintained his defensive stance. I won't steal your things and run away. Besides, I would never lay a hand on a child, Whitler reassured him. Then he smirked meaningfully. But since you said that, how about we make a wager? Boris remained silent, wary of the unpredictable offer. Whitler explained, I promised the Count I would train you, and I will do so until next spring. Until then, every day I will give you a chance to reclaim this sword. If you succeed, I will never touch the Winterer again. But if you fail, I will do everything to make it mine, even if I have to strike you down. At Whitler's decisive question, Boris fell into thought, reminding himself that this life was not just his own. A memory flooded back, the image of him helpless beside his dying brother Yevgen, the burden of that life forever weighing on his shoulders. His thoughts continued. He had to survive. He had to protect the Winterer as a Gineman. Returning to reality, Boris raised his head, his eyes sharp. In that case, what will you use to guarantee your promise? Whitler smiled, offering his dagger. I will give you this dagger as collateral. If you succeed, return it to me. With that, he threw the dagger towards Boris, declaring boldly, otherwise, I will personally take it back from you. Boris clutched the dagger, asserting, this is something truly important to me. He silently read the inscription on the blade. Remember the calamity? Whitler smiled challengingly. A pact with the Count, and now another pact. Can I accept it? From behind, Ianami spoke, advising, young Master Boris, please accept the offer. The white-haired boy looked at Boris with an urgent gaze. Ianami continued, Lanzi, why don't you just agree to what he's proposing? Boris still hesitated, but then a strange feeling suddenly flashed in his mind. He wondered about the feeling welling up inside him. It wasn't despair or humiliation from being forced, but actually, Whitler smirked, asking, so, is our pact sealed? A feeling as if he had met a guide, a light in the darkness. With new resolve, Boris's hand gripped the dagger tightly. I hope you will keep your word like a warrior, Boris said. And Whitler replied, very well. I am a warrior, just as your name implies. In that moment, Boris felt as if he had found the key to escape the long night, a scene filled with light and hope. Dawn broke over the Belnor estate, ushering in a new day. At the training ground, Whitler threw a sword to Boris. Here, take it. It's a sword for a son. The Count gave it to you. Boris was surprised but quickly caught the sword. Just as he was about to draw the sword, Whitler quickly stopped him. Hold on. Whitler frowned. Excuse me? Who told you to draw your sword? Whitler declared boldly. For the foreseeable future, you will not be allowed to use a sword. Instructor Whitler ordered. You will start with running. He explained the rules. Just run around the castle, and I'll tell you when to stop. As Boris began to run, Whitler and Ayanami stood with their arms crossed, observing from a distance. Whitler turned to Ianami, asking probing, what's wrong with you? Is there something you want to tell me? Ianami simply looked back in silence, his eyes serious. The young servant spoke. I hope you will return his sword soon. Whitler smirked. Oh, you're more loyal than you appear. Inami warned. If you trouble him too much, I will have to question your intention. The instructor retorted with a cold gaze. A brat like you dares to threaten me? He stated bluntly. The reason I'm doing this is because I don't believe in your master's ability. Inami coldly replied, That's irrelevant, because people must prove their own worth. Whittler chuckled at the boy's maturity. So you're just doing your job, I understand. He showed interest. Now I'm interested in you. Feel free to observe if you wish. Inami maintained his steadfast gaze as he faced the instructor. He firmly asserted, That is something I have the freedom to choose. Don't speak as if you are the one granting permission. With that, Inami turned and left to prepare water for Boris, leaving Whittler stunned. The instructor ruffled his hair, muttering, Freedom to choose? He still couldn't believe it. Did he really just say that? Dusk gradually fell over the Belnor estate, and under the twilight, Boris continued to run tirelessly. Gasping for breath, Boris still toiled at his running exercise. He silently counted that he had run 10 laps, wondering where the instructor had gone. The image of the cunning instructor flashed in his mind, and Boris began to suspect he was being played. But then he brushed it aside, realizing this was a test within their contract. He was determined to show him that he was the only one worthy of the sword Winterer. He had to show him that once he started, he would never give up, that he would absorb every lesson to achieve victory, and that he could not stop him. Just as his will reached its peak, his body betrayed him, staggering and then collapsing to the ground. Lying sprawled, Boris bitterly admitted that while his mind always sought survival, his physique was too weak. But he couldn't collapse like this. He had to get up. He screamed to himself in his mind, Get up, Boris. Get up and run. He had to prove to Instructor Walnut that he was someone who would survive in any circumstance. Despite trying to force himself up, his legs buckled once more. He lay motionless on the ground, all his strength seemingly depleted. Suddenly, a bucket of cold water was splashed directly onto him. Boris jolted awake, his eyes wide with surprise. Standing before him was Ianami, the silver-haired servant, offering a towel. Please forgive my action. Still gasping, Boris took the towel and mumbled his thanks. The first thing he did was wipe his sword dry, thinking he couldn't let it get wet. Boris told himself he had to keep running. At least when Instructor Walnut returned, he would feel a little guilty. Suddenly, Instructor Whittler appeared, shouting, Stop! Why did you put your sword down? Do you think you're training to run? I only teach things related to swords, Whittler roared angrily. He continued to scold. With the mindset that you put your sword down when it feels heavy, what kind of swordsmanship can you learn? How pathetic. Leaving Boris stunned. Boris thought to himself that there was no need to argue or make excuses. This was definitely his fault. He knelt, propped up by his sword, and said, I apologize. I will not repeat this mistake. Please punish me. Whittler replied sternly. Very well, I will punish you. He turned to Ianami and asked, How many laps has he run today? And received the answer, 12 laps. Whittler declared the punishment. From now on, you will run 12 laps every day until I leave this place. Boris bowed his head, sincerely replying, Yes, thank you, sir. Instructor Whittler smiled with satisfaction. All right, then, he turned to Rose. Shall we finish our training? And led the girl away. After walking a short distance, Whittler looked back with a complex gaze. His gaze was directed towards Boris and Inami, who were standing together on the training ground. As he walked, Whittler scratched his head, thinking, Seriously, what the hell did I just do? The instructor's thoughts continued. Why did I get unnecessarily angry at the boy? 1 month later, Boris gripped the hilt of his sword, his stance much steadier than before. He swung his sword in a powerful, decisive arc, his eyes filled with intense concentration. From a distance, Roseness quietly stood watching Boris diligently train alone. Roseness looked worriedly at the sky and suggested to Instructor Whittler, Sir, it's about to rain. Shall we go inside to talk? She glanced towards the training ground, where Boris was still diligently practicing alone. Meanwhile, Boris swung his sword, thinking to himself that the instructor was treating him so badly, he probably wouldn't call him in, and he might have to endure the rain alone. Unexpectedly, Roseness happily turned to Whittler and said, How about we call Boris in to talk with us too, for fun? The instructor thoughtfully stroked his chin, while little Rose eagerly awaited his decision. Whittler smiled and agreed, making Rose exclaim joyfully, Wonderful, I'll tell them to prepare some snacks too. Soon, a lavish tea table with fragrant pastries was set. After enjoying the treats, Whittler suddenly declared, After eating all this, I feel hungry again, making Roseness ask in bewilderment, How can that be? He chuckled and explained, Haven't you ever experienced it? When you've been starved for a long time, you feel anxious when you finally get to eat again, wanting to eat quickly and a lot. Roseness frankly replied, I don't know that feeling, while Boris just listened in silence. Whittler smirked meaningfully. Strange, isn't it? He continued his lecture. Humans are sometimes swept away by ambition. Even when full, they still try to stuff themselves. They always want more. Want to climb higher, Whitler said, his eyes sharpening. So when will our ambitions truly be satisfied? He turned to Roseness and asked directly, Roseness, what is your greatest desire? The one thing that, once you have it, you will wish for nothing else. The girl confidently replied, I have everything already. If I want something new, Father will buy it for me. Whitler shook his head. I don't think so. Are there truly no desires that your father cannot grant you? He painted a scenario. For example, becoming the most beautiful lady at your coming-of-age ceremony, receiving countless marriage proposals, and having to carefully choose. Upon hearing about marriage, Roseness immediately blushed, stammering, Huh. Boris quietly watched his friend, who was completely flustered, while Whitler smiled with amusement. Finally, the instructor turned his gaze towards Boris. What about you? Do you want to state your desire before I state mine? Boris looked up and began. In his mind, he recalled the instructor's words. He couldn't forget the beautiful castle and the Belnor family in this peaceful land, but the decaying reflection reminded him that none of this truly belonged to him. Roseness looked up, while Kamiya stood behind her, holding Boris's sword. The sword, a symbol of his only self-defense. Boris thought to himself, he was no different from a child thrown into an enemy camp. Anyone could harm him. Amidst the hazy field in his mind, he wondered what was most needed to survive. Returning to reality, Boris stated firmly, What I want is, Instructor Whitler listened in silence, to be able to survive on my own and not rely on anyone, Boris declared boldly. Whitler was slightly surprised by the frank answer. After a moment of silence, the instructor nodded. I understand. Whitler's voice echoed as the image of the castle appeared. The ability to not rely on anyone. He casually remarked, That's even easier than Roseness's desire. At least you won't have any competitors. Roseness flinched. What? I have rivals? Who are they? Which made Whitler smile mischievously. Whitler began to tell them about Chloe Devantina, the Duke's daughter, Anna Murad's most promising bridal candidate. A Duke's daughter? Roseness trembled, her face paling in shock. Whitler delivered another fatal blow, while Boris could only sigh inwardly at his teacher's joke. Boris interrupted. Teacher, stop that and continue with your own story. But Whitler only replied slyly. Whitler put on a thoughtful expression, preparing to begin his lesson. He began, Do you two know who the strongest knight in Anna Murad is? Boris bluntly replied. No. Truly ignorant, Whitler scoffed. That would be Viscount Ganfear, a master of the spear and undefeated in verbal duels. He continued to list. There's also Bernard, the son of the Grand Duke of the North, not yet 20 years old but already renowned throughout the region. He even dedicated his victory in the previous Silver Skull tournament to Queen Haikan, the host nation. Boris curiously asked about the tournament, and Whitler explained it was a martial arts competition for those under 20, but no one from Travich's had ever won. Boris thought to himself that if this tournament was famous, his brother Yevgen would surely have participated. Whitler continued his lecture on other powers, from warrior princesses to the lacourtable mercenary legion. This world is vast, and there are many strong individuals, he concluded, then turned to ask his two students, What do you two think about this? Chewing on a pastry, Roseness innocently replied, I hope our country's warriors will be stronger than those from other countries. Boris, however, answered coldly, They are them, not me. As long as they're not enemies, they don't matter. Whitler gritted his teeth. That is precisely your problem, he snapped, questioning. You have no thought of wanting to become stronger than them, or learning their skills? Boris stood up abruptly, facing his teacher's anger. He looked up and asked a question that made the atmosphere heavy. Why should I want to become so strong? His question echoed outside the peaceful Belnor mansion. All three were plunged into tense silence after Boris's unexpected question. Boris's expression at this moment was incredibly resolute, without a hint of wavering. Whitler couldn't believe it. You've decided to learn the sword, yet you don't think about becoming the best? He looked directly into Boris's eyes, concluding, For someone who wants to learn the sword, you truly have no ambition at all. Boris explained, The probability of encountering strong opponents is very low, and I'd be content just learning enough sword fighting to live safely. Whitler smirked, crossing his arms as he asked, Is that so? Is your only goal just to survive? Without hesitation, Boris replied firmly, Yes. Whitler's gaze sharpened. Don't you intend to live a more glorious or fulfilling life? Boris lowered his head, his voice full of self-doubt. I don't know if I'm allowed to enjoy such a luxury. Whitler keenly picked up on the word aloud and began to argue back. He looked at his student, his voice deepening. That means you want a quiet life. By not resisting or attracting the attention of fate, Whitler growled, posing a question that cut deep into Boris's pride. Don't you have any pride? Any desire to leave your mark on this world? He shouted, pushing him to the limit. Have you never thought that a flower blooming at its peak is the most beautiful? Those words conjured an image of Yevgen in Boris's mind, stunning him. Boris's face paled, and sweat began to break out. his hands clenched tightly on his thighs, trying to suppress the surging emotions. Boris looked up, facing the instructor. Death is the end. I don't want to burn brightly for a moment and then have it all end. He continued desperately, his eyes etched with fear. I don't want to live only in the memories of others. Boris squeezed his eyes shut, his voice lost in pain. Yes, a flood of memories rushed back, revealing a field where Yevgen Geniman's life had ended. Boris questioned himself in anguish. What meaning is there in a younger brother remembering someone like Yevgen? Whitler remained silent, deeply observing his student's pained reaction. Then he suddenly unleashed a fatal question. How many people have died for you? Boris froze at the question that pierced his heart. He painfully admitted, I can't name anyone, Whitler retorted sharply. You're carrying too many lives on your shoulders. That's the problem. He analyzed. You're not immortal. You can't live for all those who have passed. And secondly, he continued, you cannot deny your own ambition. Whitler used a sharp example. When you're hungry, do you pick up scraps to eat? Or what do? How long can you suppress your hunger and stare at empty plates? He concluded cruelly, to live without ambition, that is death. Cornered, Boris slumped down, his voice trembling. What if? What if I become strong? What if I kill all of them? What then? He cried out in despair, the harsh truth spilling out. The dead cannot be brought back to life. Whitler merely watched his completely broken student in silence. He clicked his tongue, slumping into a chair with a look of helplessness. You're wrong, Whitler growled. It's ridiculous to base the value of your life on the dead. He challenged, don't you have any desires of your own? Don't you want to live a full life? You can honor the dead by living brilliantly, not just barely existing. The image of a lone swordsman in a field appeared, illustrating his philosophy. Boris whispered, his voice full of bitterness. There was a time I yearned for that too. For my brother to live. But now I'm too tired, he said, his eyes empty. Besides survival, I have no interest in anything else. Memories of Yevgen in the snowy weather flooded back, along with his brother's advice. I want you to explore all possibilities of your life and survive. Boris's thoughts echoed amidst the white snowscape. That's why I will survive. No matter the cost, I will not fall easily. But then a tormenting question arose as he walked alone. But this long life I've gained, what should I use it for? He turned his back, questioning himself in his empty heart. Just simply surviving alone. Is it truly meaningless? Returning to reality, Roseness innocently asked Whitler, Teacher, why did you say Boris is pitiful? The girl continued, asserting, he lives very well in our home, lacking nothing. He will never go hungry here. Whitler sneered. Haha, I suppose that's true. He turned to Boris, his gaze sharp. So, what are you going to do? You're not going to stay in tonight just because of the weather, are you? Roseness exclaimed in surprise, but Whitler merely replied casually, if you don't want to, you can rest today. After a moment of silence, Boris stood up abruptly, resolute. No, let's go. He quietly followed Whitler out of the room, leaving Roseness sitting on the floor with a worried expression. The maid Cammy sighed, suggesting that if Boris was tired, he could do it another time, and Roseness agreed. Standing in a corner, Ianami had silently witnessed the entire conversation. A moment later, Ianami sat alone under a makeshift shelter, quietly watching the rain pour down on the training ground. From a distance, he saw Boris and Whitler facing each other amidst the torrential rain. Whitler smirked, his voice full of sarcasm. All right, what wonderful weather. Holding Boris's sword, Winterer, in his hand, he provoked, shall we begin? The instructor laid down the rules. As always, the limit is 1 hour. If you can't retrieve this sword, today's training will end. Boris looked up, letting the rain lash his face, his eyes burning with fighting spirit. Today, I will definitely get it back. I must get it back. He gripped his sword hilt tightly, growling his vow. This time, I will reclaim Winterer. Boris's blue eyes flashed with an intense light. Boris stomped his foot, dashing off into the pouring rain. The boy swung his wooden sword, charging straight at Whitler with fierce momentum. The instructor stood still, calmly awaiting the furious attack. The two weapons clashed fiercely, splashing icy rainwater. Boris gritted his teeth, pouring all his strength into the decisive blow, but Whitler merely watched coldly, easily blocking the tip of his sword. The disparity in strength completely overwhelmed Boris. Whitler scoffed, too weak, try again. With just a slight push, he made Boris stumble, almost falling. Even so, the boy did not back down, taking a stance for the next attack. The wooden sword in Boris's hand trembled violently under the pressure. He realized in despair, this won't do. I have to get stronger. His hands gripped the sword hilt tightly, a fierce craving for power rising within him. Stronger, even stronger. The cry echoed in his mind. I must be strong enough so that no one, not even this guy, can take Winterer from me again. Winterer is a sword coveted by all. To protect it, I must be stronger. Whitler swung his staff, and Boris's attack was once again neutralized. If I keep getting stronger, then one day, no one will pay attention to me or stand in my way anymore. He slid across the soaking wet training ground, but his will remained unshaken. In the pouring rain, Boris panted, secretly thinking he needed to find a place to rest, a place where no one would threaten him, a place where he could cry to his heart's content. But right now, his heart was filled with resentment, because his heart was still imprisoned in a place that didn't allow him to be weak. Shaking off his thoughts, Boris struggled to his feet, taking a firm stance. He gripped his sword tightly, his eyes blazing with an unquenchable fire of determination. "Come on!" Boris roared, charging straight at Instructor Whittler. Wooden sword and wooden staff clashed sharply, creating piercing sounds amidst the rain. Whittler easily blocked the attack, a smirk playing on his lips. "Good," he acknowledged. "You're finally a little faster now." Boris could only grit his teeth at the immense power disparity. From a distance, Ianami Rosenkrogans silently watched the fierce battle. As expected, Boris was once again knocked, sprawling onto the soaking wet ground. But he immediately sprang up, his body already too accustomed to being knocked down. With a dirt-streaked face and resolute eyes, Boris stood firm once more. Ianami's red eyes never left the tenacious figure of the young boy. Whittler shouted loudly, his voice full of authority. "Last chance!" He lunged forward like a whirlwind, unleashing the strongest attack since the start of the training session. "Charge!" Whittler roared as Boris braced himself to parry the thunderous blow. Boris Gineman gritted his teeth, enduring as his wooden sword bent under the weight of Whittler's attack. Blood seeped from a wound on his cheek, but the young boy's eyes only shone with unwavering resolve. In the pouring rain, Boris mustered all his strength to hold on, refusing to collapse. Suddenly, a surge of power erupted from deep within him, and he silently roared in his mind, "I have to take it back. I will take it back!" The determined shout rang out, and Boris pushed back his opponent with all his might. Seizing the opportunity, he lunged forward, catching Whittler off guard with this sudden outburst. Veins bulged on his arms as Boris tensed, pouring all his will into a single strike. The night was silent, with only the sound of falling rain and the cold moonlight witnessing the battle. He swung his sword high, the silver gleam of the blade flashing under the moonlight. "Ha!" Boris yelled, unleashing a full power slash. Whittler stood still, his sharp eyes following every movement of his student. A subtle, knowing smile suddenly appeared on the instructor's lips. He calmly raised his wooden staff, ready to face Boris's desperate attack. A dry crack echoed, and Boris's wooden sword shattered upon impact. After a moment of silence, Whittler softly said, "Very good." Boris hung his head, panting, his entire body trembling from exhaustion. The two figures stood facing each other in the silent training ground. The battle seemed to have reached its end. The young boy panted, sweat and rainwater mingling on his youthful face. But then, Boris looked up, a relieved and satisfied smile appearing, having overcome himself. Instructor Whittler smirked. "You let your guard down!" Whittler yelled, knocking the sword from Boris's hand. Knocked back, Boris staggered in a daze. The instructor placed the wooden staff on the student's head, acknowledging his defeat. Boris stared in shock at his sword, lying abandoned on the damp ground. He thought to himself, "I've never let go of my sword, even after fighting for nights on end. After I let Winterer be taken from me, I never let go, even when I fell or lost. Why am I doing it now?" A voice echoed in his head. How pathetic. The image of the precious sword from the past reappeared in Boris's mind. Suddenly, Whittler grabbed Boris by the collar. "You're truly pathetic," he roared, lifting him up. But instead of a punishment, Whittler pulled Boris into a tight embrace. He whispered, "There's still so much in this world you haven't seen, kid. Why do you try so hard to suppress yourself? Everyone struggles, but they still yearn to live a wonderful life without hiding those desires." The instructor's words were like an electric current running through him, causing Boris's eyes to widen. Amidst the symbolic cosmic space, that embrace seemed to enlighten the lost soul of the young boy. Memories flooded back. Boris recalled the home he could never return to. In Boris's mind appeared the image of the uncle who had caused the rebellion, his deceased father, and the loyal butler Tulk, along with the truly existing lake spirit. And above all, was his older brother, who meant the world to him. Yevgen's dying words echoed, "Boris, you must live on." Instructor Whittler tightened his embrace and continued, "Overcome this brutally insane world with everything you have and survive." He continued gently, "People don't live just to avoid dying. They live every second, every minute for what will come tomorrow." Those words made Boris burst into tears. From a distance, Ianami silently witnessed the entire event. He watched intently with an inscrutable gaze. Then, Ianami looked up at the vast Belnor mansion under the night sky. All of this was, in fact, just the beginning. In this place, he was merely an outsider. Countless eyes were watching his every move. What decision would he make? Where would he go? And how would he live his life? Just to survive?